And a pleasant good afternoon to everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. I am Vince D'Addario. That is Brian Driscoll, and we are back. It is Wednesday, and we are talking defensive newcomers, Brian. And this is going to be a fun one. I think I say that a lot now that it comes out of my mouth, but I always think it's going to be a fun one. And we were talking a little bit before we started today that there are a lot of returning guys, especially on the defensive line for Notre Dame. So if a quote-unquote newcomer is going to get playing time, he's absolutely going to earn it. So this is going to be an exciting topic to break down. Remember, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit all that fun stuff. But we're going to come at you here with our normal podcast, and then we'll hit the Q&A after that. So, Brian, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing all right, Vince. I'm surviving.
Yeah, I hear that. So let's just jump in with both feet, Brian. We're talking defensive newcomers. What we'll do is we'll start at the front, work our way to the back, and what that means for those out there that are not football coaches and do not understand our vernacular. The front is the defensive line.
Before we kind of get into that, Vince, I do want to kind of go overview. I want to just kind of talk about elaborate a little bit on what you said at the beginning, because the interesting thing is you could argue that the top level talent in this defensive class is every bit as good as the top level talent in the offensive class, outside of maybe Blake Fisher, simply because, the two best defensive signees, Gabriel Rubio and Prince Colley, have unique circumstances. Gabriel got hurt in spring, and then Prince was not an early enrollee. So, right. Blake has a little bit of advantage, but the difference is when you look at I think a strong defensive line class, a very talented linebacker, and then a very deep, talented secondary class that in most years at Notre Dame would probably have multiple guys playing early on. Notre Dame has so many guys coming back on defense, really on all three levels. I mean, now defensive line has more proven players coming back, right? Defensive line and linebacker. Right. But even in the secondary, there's a lot of players coming back, and there's a lot of talented players coming back. So it's one of those situations where this class in past years would have had a lot of guys that you're just saying, well, that guy's going to have to play. He's going to have to play. This year, it's a lot different, where there's not a single freshman that I look at and say, he has to play. I don't think there's one. Maybe you could make that case in the secondary, but from a body standpoint, that's not the case. Yeah. So it's really just about they're going to have to earn it. And whereas on defense, it's kind of like, well, Blake Fisher earned it, but there wasn't a whole lot of people in front of him to have to beat out. He would have earned it anyway, I think, but sure. Then you look at receiver where it's like, one injury and these guys have to play, tight end, one injury and this guy, one of these guys is going to be the third tight end. Running back, one injury and one of these guys is going to have to play. So there's a little bit more, there's just to me a little bit more, there's going to be a little bit more work for this group. So if we're seeing some freshmen getting on the field, especially early in the season, it's because those guys had really strong fall camps, and that's going to be what's needed. Now, the good news for them is some really talented players in this class that are going to be hard to keep off the field. And so if they aren't playing, and again, this is a defensive staff that has proven itself to not be afraid to play younger players in recent years. And then Marcus Freeman comes from a program where he's used to having to play young, talented players, because that's what you need to do to build a depth chart. So, and then of course Mike Mickens, we had a freshman All-American in Ahmed Gardner in 2019 before he came to Notre Dame. He had a first-team All-MAC player or second-team All-MAC player who was a true freshman at Bowling Green when he was there. So he's someone who has, and we saw Clarence Lewis start last year. So you have a defensive staff that, in my opinion, has shown more of a proclivity to playing younger players throughout their tenures than what we've seen in recent years in Notre Dame.
No, and that's fair, and especially
on offense.
There
at Notre Dame on offense.
Yes, there it is, and I think that's an important fact to put out there, because and again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. If a team is if a freshman is making significant strides and he's on the field when it counts, when it matters, that means they earned it, man. That means they went over a few guys that are already on that depth chart. So, Brian, I see you put up a super chat from Ali Muhammad. Again, that was
from before the show started. So, second day in a row, Ali. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that is absolutely awesome. We appreciate the support as always. So, Brian, I tell you what, let's start with the defensive line. Like I said, we'll go front to back. You pick a name or two out of the hat and see who you think may be one of those newcomers that is going to surprise, potentially get some playing time. I think I know where you're going here with this first one, but I'll let you take it away for defensive line.
Well, there's really only one defensive lineman that I think has that I'm pretty confident is going to play in some way, shape, form, or fashion on the defensive line, assuming he's healthy, and that would be Gabriel Rubio.
Absolutely.
And that's a combination of, I mean, that's not even a combination. That's just because he's big and strong. I mean, and he's talented. I mean, he missed some time in the spring. I'm curious to see what his health is going to be like. But part of the reason that I feel that Gabriel's going to play, not just because he's talented, is because I think he brings something that not a lot of the other defensive linemen have. There's only two defensive linemen that I see that really have that size that you covet up front against some of the bigger boys. I mean, Kurt Hinish is 295. He's listed at 295, but you and I both know he's a puffed up 295. He doesn't play like a 295.
He won't be 295 2 years after he leaves or stops playing football.
Right. And I question whether or not he's 295 by the time you get to October. You know, because he doesn't play that way. I mean, it's not his game. That's not why Kurt had such a good year last year, because he's a big 295 guy that's going to, two gap. And so what we're looking at is, you got to look for some guys that bring some of that beef to the table, natural beef to the table. And there's really only two. It's Gabriel Rubio, who we're going to talk about today, and then Aiden Keanaaina, who we're going to talk about next week when we talk about sort of the ascending sophomore. So when you look at Gabriel, he's 6'5", he's 295 plus, he's a big, thick, strong kid. He's one of those guys that can bring a little bit of beef to the table. And so that right there alone is the one thing that to me, more than anything, is going to give him a chance to earn at least some sort of rotation role, whether it be goal line, short yardage. Maybe, he's a guy you want to play more against Wisconsin than you would against USC, for example.
Beef on beef, and there's going to be a running game. And right.
But the other thing Gabriel has shown in high school, which is something that made him a top 100 recruit, and according to Sport SI All-American, made him a top 50 recruit nationally, is he was a playmaker in high school. He was a kid that had almost 20 sacks as a junior, had some absurd number like 45 tackles for loss as a junior, just something ridiculously stupid, which just shows how, and I don't care what level of football you're playing at, if you have over 40 tackles for loss in a season that goes 12, 13 games, you're a monster. And that's what Gabriel was. And he's got some quickness off the ball. He's got really powerful hands. His dad was an offensive lineman in the NFL for a long time, so he has some advanced understanding of how to use his hands to be effective, how to keep guys off of his body. So, and he's a kid that plays with a great motor, Vince. One of my favorite Gabriel Rubio stories isn't something I saw in film where he had 4 sacks in a game or anything like that. It was, he showed up to the O-line, the lineman camp that Notre Dame has that's around their Irish invasion back in 2019. He already had an offer, and we all knew, all the people in the media knew that he came to Notre Dame that weekend because he was planning to commit. And so he has an offer from Notre Dame. He's got a committable offer. He's in town to actually make a commitment. And so I wasn't actually expecting him to work out at the lineman camp. And then when I saw he was going to work out, I figured, he'd take some reps. He was out there in the rain going through drills, and he played that day. And there was some inside and some outside. So there's like 2 different times he worked out, and he won the defensive lineman, like MVP. Blake Fisher won the MVP on offense. But Gabriel was playing like a kid that was trying to earn a scholarship. Like, just hustling, like jumping in front of the line, trying to get extra reps, trying to get work in, trying to show off his ability, trying to show off his motor, just playing with great effort. And I'm thinking, this kid already has a Notre Dame offer. This kid's literally going to commit to Notre Dame this weekend. The staff knows it. He knows it. What the heck is he doing? And I absolutely loved that about him. Like, he played like a kid that had something to prove. And that just said a lot about the kind of young man that Gabriel Rubio is number one, he loves playing football. And number 2, when he's out there, he's going to give you everything he's got. Yeah. And those traits are things that I love. And then when you combine that with the fact that I think there is a need for that kind of beefy body on defense, and I think that it's going to be hard to keep him on. And there's a talented group of players in front of him now, don't get me wrong, but it's going to be hard to keep him completely off the field this season, assuming he's healthy.
Yeah. And when a guy comes in and he's already physically able to go, and bang heads with a Division I team, that's important, right? Because you don't see every freshman come in that way. And it's the same kind of thing that we've been talking about with Blake Fisher. Now, it's a different situation, obviously, but when you come in physically ready, as Gabe Rubio did, that makes things a little bit easier. And then you add to it his motor and what he brings to the table in that fashion. I don't see how you can keep him off the field, to be honest, especially with the way that Notre Dame likes to rotate their defensive linemen. I just don't see any way that 97 isn't going to be on the field someplace, somehow, somewhere.
And especially at a position like defensive line, somebody's going to miss a game with an injury. Somebody's going to
just a little nagger. Like it doesn't have to be a big one.
Yeah. Right. And you know what, too? I think, too, Vince, is he's a guy that I'm curious to see if Gabriel's capable of being an edge player in the 3-down looks. I don't know if he is or not, but I'm that could also be something. Or, that could open up an opportunity where maybe he gets some nose minutes when they go to some 3-down fronts.
Yeah, for sure.
Because of that beef, him and Aiden Kauna'ana battling for some of those snaps at the nose. But I think that flexibility, he can play nose, he can play 3 technique, potentially could play some 5 technique based on what Notre Dame told him during the recruiting process. And, this is a kid that I think is going to have a chance to play. And if he doesn't play this year, well, let me say it. I think another reason you may want to get him on the field this year is because there's definitely going to be a need for him next year. You're going to lose Kurt Heinisch. You're probably going to lose Jason Adamiola. You're bringing in as of right now, one interior defensive player in your recruiting class, Donovan Heinisch. Now maybe that changes if Hero Canoe or some guys like that jump in on board. But this isn't a situation where you're going to lose some guys right now. You're going to have a lot of guys coming back, but you're going to see him make that big jumps. He's a guy that I think they're going to want to make sure that he's ready to go in 2022 at the very least, which means you're going to want to try to force him into some situations where he can earn some opportunities, to at least show what he can do. And if he doesn't show out, then, you have other options. But if he steps up and shows out, then he's a guy that you're going to want as part of your rotation.
So, Brian, let's talk linebacker. Or is there anybody else, I should say, that you wanted to bring up from the defensive line?
I don't see Will Schweitzer doing a whole lot this year. And obviously Devin Upau, who was actually playing linebacker in the spring, he transferred out. And but there's something I don't know about this. I anticipate Jason Onye to redshirt this year. That's my anticipation. That's my expectation. I did talk to a source yesterday who said, don't be surprised if he earns a little bit of playing time this year. Maybe it would be like redshirt playing time, but like, I'm told that he's actually impressed people this summer. Really? Like he's up to 275. I've definitely had that verified. He's at least 275 now. But I've been told his athleticism and size has really caught people's eye during workouts. Now, he's still raw. He's played 2 years of high school football, right? Yeah. That's it. Now, what's amazing is in his second year of high school football, he had like 17 sacks. So, he was a very low-ranked kid, didn't go to camps, obviously missed the senior year because of COVID stuff. They didn't play football in Rhode Island, Vince, but he was a guy that I gave a 4.5-star upside grade to. And from what I'm told, he's already impressing people with his size and athleticism. Now, he's still raw. They're going to need to work on him. And that strong side defensive end depth chart is pretty deep.
Right.
But he's a guy that, from what I'm told, is going to stand out, that he's going to find his way on the field this year. What I think that meant was more of just like, don't be surprised if he gets those 4 games in for the rep before.
Okay.
The new rule with the last few years, you can play up to 4 games,
which I love
before you lose. I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think that, and honestly, when they expand the playoff, they better expand that rule. Because if some of these teams are going to be playing 16, 17 games,
good point.
You better let them get up to 5 games. You know what I mean? Something like that. So
good point.
I think that would be beneficial. So I'm curious to see if he's going to step up. I wouldn't expect. I had him graded higher than I had him. I believe I had him as a 4-star recruit. I'm going to have to pull that up. But so I like Jason Onye, but my ranking of him as a 4-star recruit was all about his potential.
Right.
He was not a guy that I anticipate playing as a freshman, and I still don't anticipate it because it's one of those, me, Vince, I got to see it to believe it kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the source that told me that has been really accurate in recent years, like really accurate. Like, so when he told me that, I was like, whoa, really? Because he normally doesn't tell me stuff unless it's like, no, it's a 3.5-star recruit is what ended up by last because he didn't play as a senior, but he had a 4.5-star upside. And you don't often see that kind of big jump from what you are to your upside. But this source has been really good for me for the last few years. And so when he told me that, I kind of was like, okay, let's see what he can do. Because that would be impressive, especially when you consider how good the big end depth chart is, in my opinion.
So, Brian, let's move to linebacker. And there is at least one that I can think of off the top of my head that we could be talking about here. And I know he's a fan favorite, and rightfully so, because he's got a ton of talent. It's Prince Colley is who I'm talking about. Now, I believe he's going to start out at Rover, and the Rover position is 3 deep that I'm aware of. Does that put him at 4, and then he's got to work his way up? Or, where do you see him potentially getting on the field?
I would imagine you always start a freshman at the back of the line. I mean, that's how I think it should be.
Yeah.
But unless you've made a promise to a kid that you then need to keep, if you promise a kid he's going to play, then you need to put him in position the day he arrives to earn that, so you can back up your word. I don't know of any Notre Dame coaches that tell kids that.
Right.
I from what I understand, Notre Dame coaches only tell kids you're going to get the opportunity to play as a freshman. They don't promise it.
Oh, they should say, but yeah,
that's exactly. So I don't see that happening. I don't think that happened. But what I do think is that he's going to have a chance to work up the depth chart. Now, if you've seen pictures of Prince from summer workouts, he's built more like an inside linebacker now.
Yeah,
and he is a thick, well-built kid.
So do you think that could be his future potentially? Like him
potentially? I mean, but
inside?
again, it's more about how you run than how you look and your size. True. And that's the thing I always say is like, look, you could be 220 pounds and be more of an. I mean, Drew White is 225 pounds. He's built like some of the Rovers they have, but he ain't playing Rover. His game is more of an inside linebacker game.
Right.
So it's more about his game. How does he move? The always thing I worry about when a kid puts on a lot of muscle in an off season is he going to still be flexible? Is he still going to have the explosiveness and all that? But I'm curious to see what Prince is going to do. But the thing about it is, Vince, is it doesn't really matter where he starts, because if he's a guy that there's like, boy, this kid's too good to not play, then they'll move him somewhere to get him on the field, whether it's as a rush end, in third down situations, because he's not really in the mix of defensive end, but he's super athletic. Maybe you find that. Maybe it's a nickel package. Maybe it's inside as a Will or a Mike if you're not happy with your Will depth chart, because that's a position that you look at now and you say the depth chart there is a little bit shakier now that Devin Upau is gone, because they basically flipped Osita Ekwonu and Devin Upau this spring. And from what I understand, they're planning on leaving Osita as a Viper to make sure that depth chart solidified. So then you look at it and say, okay, JD Bertrand's could play both Mike and Will. You have Bo Bauer and Drew White, who are honestly, I mean, we've talked about maybe there's some looks where they could play together against a Wisconsin or something like that, but I wouldn't be playing USC and North Carolina and those two, Cincinnati, with those two guys in the field together.
I don't even know if those two play on the field to maybe you even get rid of the Mike in that, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But you just got me thinking. I was like, maybe we get more athletic guys.
Yeah. But I look at it and I say, there's a place that maybe it will, because it's not really a proven position. I mean, you have two guys that played a ton, but I don't think either Marist or Shane Simon played so well last year that you're like, wow, we can't even dream of putting anyone there. And even if they did the spring, I don't think Marist, I've been told, didn't have a great spring. Shane had a good spring, but not like a lights out, like, oh my gosh, he's going to be the next Osmar Bilal breakout guy. I hope it can happen, and I think he's capable of it. But all I'm saying is simply that they haven't done anything yet to necessarily make us believe that we don't need to worry about the depth chart there.
Yeah, from
a number standpoint. So I could, especially now that Notre Dame has landed Jalen Sneed in the 2022 class, because you now have Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler, who are going to be freshmen next year, who project to start at Rover. Plus, you have obviously Jack Kaiser still has really 3 years left. Really,
he's got 3.
Yeah, and so you're going to have some depth at the Rover spot next year of the freshmen that are going to be guys who can play right away. I think Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Sneed are both guys capable of playing as freshmen. So do you look at that if you're a coach, as you're figuring out the depth chart? And so if you're saying like, look, Prince needs to play, but Jack Kaiser and Isaiah Pryor and Paul Moala, they kind of got that Rover position locked down. I feel a little bit more confident in those guys being backups at Rover than I do at maybe whoever's at the Will. Now, what I would consider doing is moving JD Bertrand there. But if you want to keep JD at Mike, because there's a chance both of your Mikes are gone next year. Bo Bauer's a senior. He could take his COVID year in 2022, but technically this is his final year based on he's played 4 years in Notre Dame.
Normal college nutrition. Yeah.
And then Drew White's gone after this year. So I could see a scenario in which, you move Prince inside relatively early, let him battle there, and then give JD a chance to battle at Mike, because he could be battling for a starting job going into 2022 at Mike. I'm talking about JD Bertrand.
Right.
And if you haven't seen him this spring, by the way,
I haven't.
He is freaking jacked right now. Like, JD has really muscled up. Like, I think maybe it's like his brother's getting all this love, because remember, his brother's was their best pitcher on the baseball team this year.
right.
John Michael Bertrand. And so maybe he's like, look, my brother's getting all this love. I got to go ball out this year. But I'm kidding, obviously. But he looks like he's really filled out. And he had a good spring. I thought JD had a very good spring. So I think JD and Prince are two guys you say, do we need to position them in places to step in and play in 2022? Because Shane Simon technically is done after this year too. He'd have to take a COVID year to come back in 2022 because Shane Simon played in 2018. So that's the other part of this with Prince Colley is at what point do you decide we need to start moving him in a position where he can help us not just this year, but where he can maybe be in position to start in next year? Because at best, in my opinion, in 2022, he's going to be back up to Drew Kaiser if he stays at Rover, right?
Yeah.
Barring Drew just not being the guy we think he's going to be. So why leave him out there when potentially in 2022, Prince could be starting inside at will? So that's where this can get a little bit interesting for Marcus Freeman and Nick Lazinski as they head into fall camp.
Well, one thing I do see the defensive staff potentially doing is obviously playing for this year, but also putting pieces in place to play for the future. Like I could definitely see that thought process going down to kind of how you described it, but I wouldn't put it past this coaching staff to do something like that, to have their eyes not only on the present, but also the immediate future, right?
Right, because your goal always needs to be about what can you do to help us this year to win games. But the reason I'm talking about next year in this group, because I think those two things tend to tie together. What I mean by that is if Prince Colley was going to be the number 2 Rover, let's just say hypothetically he beat out Paul Moala and Isaiah Pryor, just for argument's sake. You're not going to move him to Will to be the 3rd string Will who doesn't play to get ready for next year.
Yeah.
You just do that in the spring. You're going to leave him as your number 2 Rover, and he's going to play at Rover, right? Because your number 1 goal is to what can you do to help us this year? But if he's like, hey, look, he could be our number 3 Rover or he could be our number 3 Will, but then being a number 3 Will is going to help us, number 1, he can push those guys more, and he can help us out over here next year. Then you say, okay, let's move him now. So your goal, number 1, is always to what gives you the best chance to help us and play this year. But if those two, if the now and the future kind of intersect a little bit, that's when you can start saying, well, this is also going to help us for next year. That can be the deciding factor in making a move like that. Look, I don't know if I want to move him yet because I'm not sure if I believe that Isaiah Pryor or Paul Moala or every down guys is the number 2 Rover. We need to make sure that we have a guy in case Jack goes down. When Jack Kaiser still has a lot to prove too. Like you and I are excited about what he can bring to the table, but let's be honest, he's really played 2 full games as a rotation guy. He played against South Florida last year, and then he played a lot against Boston College. That's really it.
Yeah.
He has a lot to prove too. So that's another reason why I say you still start Prince at Rover. And then if you're like a week or 2 in the fall camp and Jack Kaiser's looking good and Moala's healthy and Pryor's looking good, then you can say, okay, let's get him. Because I'm a big believer, Vince, unless you're talking about like a junior 2 Alamaka who's going to be 240 when he shows up, a Josh Burnham who is going to be an inside guy. For a lot of these athletic kind of kids like Jack Kaiser, like Prince Colley, even like Kahanu Kia to an example, if he shows up, I don't know, my understanding he's going to enroll as a freshman and then go on a mission, but I've heard different stories about that. But he told me the last I talked to him over a month ago was he was going to, enroll at Notre Dame as a freshman. But Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler, when they show up next year, those guys to me are guys that I would start off at Rover because I believe it's easier to start outside and move inside than the other way around. Doesn't mean it can't happen. Jack Kaiser's kind of gone back and forth, but for me, give those guys a shot to start outside and then move them inside. That's just the path I would go. So I would start Prince Colley off at Rover.
Okay.
But if you see a path to him playing sooner at will, then I would move him. And I'll say this too. If Shane Simon and Maris Luafau don't get off to a good start in fall camp, then I would absolutely consider moving him over. Unless you feel like JD Bertrand can be that guy. But I would, between Bertrand and Prince Colley, one of those 2 guys, I would strongly consider moving over to Will. If Shane Simon now again, this is they both have to be good. Because if Shane's looking great and Maris is struggling, then you're still going to need that second rotation guy.
Right.
And you're going to need somebody to push Maris. If Maris is playing well and Shane is struggling, same situation. They both have to play well for me to say, hey, look, we don't have to rush. We can let Prince stay at Rover. We can let JD stay at Mike, get a little bit more work. Then we can move him to be sort of that depth guy. But if one of those two guys isn't playing well, I'm immediately moving Prince or JD, if not both, to that will position to let them battle for that job.
Isn't this what we talk about all the time about positional flexibility and guys being able to play multiple positions and how it positively impacts your team? Because, I mean, you just laid out about 13 different scenarios at linebacker because these guys can do it, because they can play multiple positions. It's so important. And for those people that follow recruiting, you understand it is so important to have that positional flexibility. That's why, Marcus Freeman's going out there and Coach Mickens about getting those long corners because, they want long corners, but then they can also play safety. You know what I mean? It's just
you can play 4 big corners together. You can't play 4 midget corners together.
Right.
I mean,
exactly
short corners, I should say. I apologize for that.
No. You're absolutely right. And so the positional flexibility of some of these linebackers coming in is just so important, especially in this Marcus Freeman defense. So I think it's going to be a riot to watch and see where these guys end up, and if anybody ends up sticking in certain places.
Yeah.
We got another super chat. Ron hitting us up. Ron, thank you so much. And he goes, "How the heck are you guys doing?" That's all.
We're doing good, Ron. We're doing good. How are you doing? I know you. I'm not sure if today's one of your chemo days, but we're praying for you, buddy, and hope you're doing well. And I'm still working on finding a. He sent me that. Actually, he sent me a couple of those those drawings of the car. So I got to try to find a
beautiful,
a frame to put it in. But so I appreciate that, Ron. But look, back to the conversation we're having about versatility. It's not just about a recruiting philosophy. It's a must in today's game.
Yeah, I agree.
Because so many teams are doing so much more. Look, what the college game influences the NFL to some degrees. The NFL influences the college game to a lot of degrees. And what we're saying come to the college game is kind of what's been in the NFL for several years now, which is just you're just not seeing teams line up in base defense anymore and playing in defense. And then occasionally you just go to a nickel where you take out a linebacker and put in a DB, right? That's kind of how it used to be. Or you take out a defensive lineman and put in a DB. You just have that little nickel or dime package. Now it's just like you have all these different types of sub packages that you have to play. Number one, to play the multiplicity that teams will use within each game. But then now, because of the way that Notre Dame schedules, and it's a must even more so for Notre Dame, because Notre Dame still schedules so uniquely that one week they're playing a Pac-12 team, the next week they're playing a Big Ten team, the next week they're playing an ACC team, the next week they're playing the triple option.
Right.
You have to have so much versatility, and not just versatility within like, okay, this guy can move around, but you need to be able to do that within your defense. You need to be able to line up with the same personnel grouping and play 3 or 4 different looks. I'm not talking about disguising coverages. I'm talking about you're a 4-2-5 on one play, you're a 3-3-5 on the next, and you're a 4-3 on the next, right?
Yeah.
That is what I'm referring to.
And there's guys on this team that can do that.
Yeah. And that's what's so important about it is to be able to do that is so important, just to be able to match up with teams, within games. But then in Notre Dame's case, it's so important because they play such different offense. Like the Big 12, that there's differences, but like they're all kind of similar. Yeah. Look at the ACC, especially now that Paul Johnson's not at Georgia Tech anymore. A lot of the ACC teams are kind of similar. In the Big 10, you still have a little bit more big and physical. You still have more physicality in the Big 10, top to bottom, than you have in the ACC. So you're still recruiting against similar teams. Even Ohio State, who has all the athletes they have, Ohio State runs the ball as well as anybody in the country. They're still going to run for 240 a game. They're still going to be big and physical on the defensive line. So even though they have more speed than the rest of their conference, they play a somewhat similar big picture style in that they still need to win in the trenches. Notre Dame doesn't have that because they don't have a conference. So they're playing the Pac-12, which is more open and spread out and athletes one week, and then the next week they're playing the Big Ten, and then the next week it's the ACC, and then it's the triple. I mean, you have to have that versatility, and so to have linebackers that can do all those kind of things is very important. And the days of recruiting just pure one position players are very limited. There's a time and a place for that. That's why I like Junior Tuihalamaka.
Sure,
but you can't have 3 Junior Tuihalamakas in one class. You can only have one. And Prince Colley is that guy. And that's something Clark Lee valued as well. He didn't use it as much because I don't think the schedule necessarily dictated it in recent years. but it's starting to change more and more and more. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why at times Coach Lee's defense has had issues with mobile quarterbacks, is because of that, because they didn't have enough of those
playing
pieces,
space guys.
Yeah. Or he didn't use them in that way.
Sure.
And it was so structured that, if you had a guy that was doing RPOs or a guy that was doing read zone, it was going to give you some problems. And we saw that really for the last couple of years. So that's where I'm at with why I think Prince Colley's an important piece, but also why I could see him being a guy that pushes. And look, let's be honest, 2019 and prior, Prince Colley's in the 2 deep the day he steps foot on campus.
Oh, there's no question. No question.
So, I mean, it's a good place to be, but I think he's going to be very hard to keep off the field.
So, Brian, let's move to the next set. Let's go secondary. We'll secondary as a whole. We'll start at corner, because corner, I have to say, is very intriguing, and I think we'll probably. Well, I don't want to say that necessarily. I was going to say we'll probably talk more about corner when we talk about, the sophomore class, and
we're going to talk a lot about it today.
But we're going to talk a lot about it today. I was like going through it in my head, and I was like, no, actually,
there's 4 of those cats. Yeah,
we're going to talk about it a lot today as well. I want to write down the time. There we go. And so this cornerback class. So there's a lot of question marks at corner for Notre Dame, and there are guys that we think are going to start. Okay. Are they freshmen at the moment? No. But I think that there are some freshmen in this class that can make some waves, and at the very least be in the 2 deep and maybe force themselves on the field at times. Like you said, depending on how you want to do things, you could put 4 corners on the field. And if you do that, you're probably going to be dipping into the freshman class. And so I will hand the baton off to you, sir, and I will let you start with your first freshman corner.
Well, I just think I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit, Vince, and not talk about one at a time. I'm going to talk about the group first, to be honest with you, because I look at this 4 and I say, I don't know which guy's definitely going to play. I'm going to have my order of who I talk about, but I think of this group of 4, I think they're all going to get an opportunity to play. I mean, and you look at the 2 deep at cornerback right now, right? You have Cam Hart, you have Clarence Lewis, and Tariq Bracy. After that, there's no experience. And even Cam Hart doesn't have much experience.
I was going to say, there's not a whole lot of experience with those 3.
And I'd say Clarence Lewis started multiple games. Tariq's played a ton of football. Sure. Cam's the one that really hasn't played.
Yeah.
Cam hasn't played a meaningful snap in Notre Dame yet, I don't believe. Okay. A little bit early in the year last year, he got some rotation, but not really. So there's some experience there. But then after that, there's even less. Ramon Henderson's never played a meaningful down. Caleb Offer's never played a meaningful down. And then it's the freshman.
Yeah.
And so there's certainly an opportunity for them to come in and play. And from what I'm told, there's a lot of excitement about what they've seen from these freshmen. Now, 2 of them are early enrollees, Ryan Barnes and Phillip Reilly. Ryan Barnes missed the first third of the spring because of an illness. So he was a little bit behind the 8 ball. But what I was told recently talking to a source is that by the end of spring, like his growth from the start of spring when he was out because of an illness to the end of spring was tremendous.
Night and day.
You go back and watch him in the blue gold game. I mean, there was a snap or 2 where he just takes Joe Wilkins and just runs him out of bounds. And so that was a little surprising to me because Ryan's a skinny kid. I mean, he's a really skinny kid. But he's physical. He's athletic. You know how high I am on Ryan Barnes. I thought he was a borderline top 100 recruit. I mean, they beat Clemson, Florida. He had offers from Georgia, I think LSU. He had some big-time offers, and that's why I kind of laughed at the 3-star ranking thing, but he's also a guy that didn't get that chance as a senior to prove himself. So I thought he'd be a little bit behind the 8 ball because he missed his senior year. And what I'm told is he got caught up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I think the reason I mentioned him first is because that boundary position is really where I think there's a need for somebody to step up and play. My understanding is that Ramon Henderson's actually going to start out to the field this spring to kind of battle for the positioning there. He could obviously play in the boundary. But after Cam Hart, there's not a lot of proven cornerbacks there. So I think that, you have Caleb Offord. I think Ramon Henderson can also play there. But there's an opportunity for a guy like Ryan Barnes to make a play. And I think Ryan's going to make a big jump from end of spring to fall camp. That's just my prediction. I'm being a little bold with it. But I think Ryan Barnes is going to have a chance to play as a freshman. I think 2 reasons. Number one, when we talked at the beginning of the show, freshmen have to earn playing time. That is true. But the pathway to that is going to be a lot easier for the freshman DBs than it is going to be for the freshmen.
Completely agree with that.
The front 7 guys.
Yeah.
because and the defensive line, for example, Gabriel Rubio, who is a top 100 recruit, there should be no doubt about that. He's got just at the nose, he'd have to beat out, and I'm going to go both. At nose, he'd have to beat out Kurt Heinisch, two of Kurt Heinisch, Howard Cross, Jacob Lacey, and Aiden Kauna'ana to get playing time there. At 3 technique, he'd have to beat out 2 of, maybe 3 of Jacob Lacey, because Jacob's a guy that can play both. Jason Adamiola, Jacob Lacey, and Riley Mills. He'd have to beat out 2 of those guys to get playing time, just as the backup, as the number 2. And whereas a corner, it's like you got to beat out Ramon Henderson, or you got to beat out Caleb Offord.
Like one guy,
right, So but those guys haven't played. Whereas the guys that I just listed, a defensive tackle outside of Aiden Kauna'ana, have played meaningful snaps in a Notre Dame uniform. It's just a different circumstance, but also because Ryan's really good. And I think he's fluid, he's smooth, he's instinctive, he's smart, he has a high football IQ, plus he's athletic, plus he's long. He is really a guy that I look at and say, the fact that Mike Mickens was here a year early means that Notre Dame got a jump start on what Marcus Freeman likes at corner. That length, and Clark Lee did too. That was something Clark Lee liked as well. But Mike Mickens really likes those guys that can come up and play man, can cover all over the field, and that's why I think he went so hard after Ryan. I mean, they went hard after Ryan Barnes. They treated him like he was, Xavier Nwankpa and Jalen Sneed and Josh. I mean, that's how much they wanted him. Now, what I mean by that is they viewed him that way, even though maybe a lot of the recruiting services didn't. So I think Ryan Barnes is a guy that if I had to predict one freshman above all the others, I'm talking D-line, linebacker, safety, corner. You said, Brian, you give me one freshman that you're certain is going to play this fall. Most certain, not certain, but most certain.
Yeah, right.
Ryan Barnes.
Had the most confidence that he's
Ryan Barnes.
The field. Yeah,
it really would. I think he's that good, and I think the need is there. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to have a chance to play a lot this year, Vince. No question about it.
Well, and you make a good point, because a lot of times when a freshman sees the field, it's a lot of different things that have to go right. You got to be, a lot of times you got to be an early enrollee, the depth chart, your talent level, right? All of those different things all kind of have to align. Like, it's almost like the planets have to align a little bit. And it sounds like that may be the case for Ryan Barnes. And again, I'm not taking anything away from his talent level, because he's got a ton of talent, but the planets seem to be aligning a little bit with the depth chart and, his opportunity. So I believe that's where your confidence level comes from, not just from a skill position, a skill level idea, but from everything seems to be kind of falling into place for him. Yeah,
it's the perfect storm for him.
Right.
Really.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I wouldn't be as kind of certain of it if it was just about the need. It was just about, look, somebody's got to play.
Yeah.
Right. I wouldn't be. I'd say that he's going to play. Why is Ryan Barnes going to play? Because who else is going to play?
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. Like, I mean, Ramon Henderson, from the people I've talked to, has had a really good progress this offseason. Like, he's going to be a guy that's going to have an opportunity to play too. So, I mean, Brian's going to have to play well. It's not just going to be like he shows up and I'm playing. He's going to have to earn it. But it's more so about that's the initial part of the conversation. But really, at the end of the day, Vince, this isn't about guys that are going to play just to play. This is about who are these guys that are going to help Notre Dame go out and win a championship or compete for a championship. And that, to me, is what Ryan Barnes is one of those kind of guys that can be a freshman that can come in and be a factor for you, to where if, Cam Hart's going to have to really be on his game, but to keep that job. But more importantly, more hopeful is that Cam does great, and now you have a guy that you can rotate in there. So maybe you can move Cam around against certain looks, or you can give Cam a breather or certain looks, or you can move Ryan around, put him in the nickel if you want to go big. Let's say you're playing a team that's pushing the tempo and they have a bigger slot, or they have a 2 tight ends and they like to use that second tight end a lot to move around the field and run routes. And do you want to put a 3rd, 4th safety on him, or do you want to put a 6'3" freshman cornerback on him? So I think there's a lot of things that Ryan Barnes can bring to the table when it comes to being able to help out as a freshman.
So I'm going to guess that next on your list is going to be Phillip Reilly, since he was the other early enrollee, or am I jumping the gun here?
I'm going to kind of go down like all four of them, and Phillip would be next because of that early enrollee. But it's not just the early enrollee aspect to it, Vince. It's also that I think Phillips has a chance. Phillip is one of those guys that has starting, and I don't necessarily believe this about Ryan. I think Ryan's more of a corner. Could he play safety? Sure, but he would need some time to develop the strength and physicality and those things to be an every down safety. I think for me, when I look at Phillip Reilly, I see a kid, Vince, that has a chance to start at all 5 secondary positions. I think he's got the skill set to be a starter at all 5 secondary positions. Now, he's got to learn experience, and he's got to get technique and all those kind of things. But from a talent standpoint, he has the potential to be a starter at all 5 positions. And that gives him even more flexibility and versatility as far as being able to earn playing time as a rookie. And so he's advanced from a size strength standpoint. I mean, he's a very strong physical kid. He's an athletic kid. He's got physicality. He can play the man coverage that they want. He can tackle. So he's another guy that you look at and say, Phillip's going to have a chance to play. And for him, it's more so about the size and the versatility that's going to give him that opportunity to play.
Well, that's exciting. And again, it's like we're like a broken record as far as positional flexibility, right? Versatility. That phrase just keeps coming up. And the fact that you are telling me that he could play all 5 positions, it's crazy talk, Brian.
Yeah.
Like the fact that somebody could do that and has the ability to do that is just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's also, again, it's about where we're going in college football now, right? The days of you have your 2 corners, and then you have Steve Atwater at safety, and then you have Ronnie Lott at the other safety. Those days aren't really here anymore. The game has changed. You don't have there's not that need for a safeties to just come down and play in the box all game. Where you're playing a lot of cover 3, and you've got your corners back, you got your free safety, but then that other safety's got to be just he's like a 4th linebacker,
like
essentially.
A Scud missile just coming down.
Yeah, I mean, safety still have to play the alleys, right? That's still part, but there's so much coverage involved now in playing safeties because of the slots and because of the advent of the spread and just moving the field around and getting athletes on the field, and teams using their tight ends now so much in the pass game, and teams like Notre Dame, for example, have tight ends that they're going to move all over the field. They're going to play slot. They're going to play the boundary. You just need guys that can cover across the board. So there's more of a need to say, hey, look, you got to be able to cover to play safety in today's game. Yeah. Yes, you have to have the ability to come down and tackle. But if I have to sacrifice one or the other, more often than not, I'm going to sacrifice the tackler for the guy that can cover against a lot of teams on the schedule. Now, against Wisconsin, it's a different argument. It's a different conversation. But there aren't a lot of Wisconsins out there. Stanford's not even doing that anymore. Stanford's still a pro style alignment, but they're back to the finesse West Coast kind of stuff, and so at least that's what they've been the last few years. Maybe that changes this year, but I just think there's a need to have guys who can cover across the field, and that's where when I talk about Phillip, that's what I'm referring to. I mean, he's got good size. He's 5'11", almost 6 foot. He's over 190 pounds. So he's got the size to play safety, but it's about his coverage skills. I think fit even better at safety or a nickel. And those are the positions that I really look at for him as a freshman to have an impact.
So we've got 2 other corners that we need to talk about. And you said at the top that all 4 of these guys could potentially see the field depending on how things go down.
So a guy that maybe does not get talked a lot about, and partly that's my fault because of how I ranked him, and that's Chance Tucker from California. I mean, we talk a lot about how Washington's just dominated Notre Dame in defensive recruiting in the last 6-7 years, especially when it comes to secondary players. Meaning ever since Jimmy Lake arrived in Washington, right? And it's going back to Kyler Gordon, going back to Asa Turner. I mean, it's just been a lot of those guys where Notre Dame's just like, we're not going to recruit that guy because he's going to end up going to Washington.
He's going to Washington, yeah.
Well, Mike Mickens started to turn that trend around last year when he got Chance Tucker. Washington really wanted Chance Tucker. My thing with Chance Tucker was it just was hard for me to evaluate him because, number one, I didn't see senior film, but number two, just the way he played, I didn't see the speed. He's always been reported to have really good track. I mean, I think 10.7 track time. Just it's moving for a junior in high school.
Yeah.
But I just never saw that on film. But I saw a kid that had great instincts, a very high football IQ, a guy that was a willing tackler despite being on the thin side. And he's like 175 pounds. And he's only listed at 5'11" to 6 foot, but he's got really long arms, and that length is really impressive. but I just didn't see the speed. What I loved about him was the instincts, though. Like, Vince, there were plays where, and we talked a little bit about this when we were breaking down Devin Moore's film recently, where Chance would be covering a guy and his back is completely turned to the quarterback. And you could just see that he was reading the receiver's eyes. And when the guy played the ball, Chance would turn around and find the ball and get his hands on the football. Or if he didn't think he had the position for that, he would wait. And when the guy flashed his hands, Chance would flash his hands and play through his hands. That type of instinct is hard to teach. It's something that Notre Dame fans have been complaining for years about Notre Dame's corners.
Sure.
Well, Chance was showing that as a sophomore and a junior in high school. And so that was always there, but I questioned the speed. Well, I was one of those things where because I knew that I was limited in what I could see from his film, that I've said for a long time, look, this is my ranking of him. But and I've said this before, I have a feeling he's going to make me look really bad for this ranking. Like, I have a feeling he's going to outplay that ranking.
But again, you didn't get to see his senior film. But so much
senior film, exactly. And his junior film was just, like I said, how they used him was it was really hard for me to tell his athleticism. He was a good athlete, but as far as ranking him higher, but I'm telling you, Vince, like, from what the people I talked to, he's already made an impression. And from what I reached out, I said, look, man, shoot me straight, okay? Here's my issue with Chance. I love this. I love this. I love this. They're like, yep, I agree with that. I said, but here's the deal. I couldn't tell on film his speed. Meaning, not saying he doesn't have speed. I just can't tell. And I'm going to be honest with people. When I'll be straight with you. Hey, look, this is why I have him ranked where I have him ranked, because I don't see this show up on film. And I was told, look, he's legit fast. From what we've seen from him since he showed up in June, this kid can flat out run. So it sounds like that speed is showing up, at least in the practices and the drills. And so I'm encouraged that will translate when he gets on the field. And that's why I say Chance is another guy to keep an eye on, to say, hey, look, he might end up being the freshman that could end up being the guy. Not just, he's the third guy. Yeah. He may end up being the guy that has a chance to play. Because I think what Chance brings to the table, of what I do know on film, what I can see on film, very good technique.
Right.
As I said, incredibly high football IQ. This is a smart young man, not just smart academically, and he is smart academically, but he's also very smart on the field. And those things don't always translate. I mean, just because you're really smart and, just because you're educated and intellectual and all those kind of things doesn't mean you're smart when it comes to football, right?
You are not wrong.
Just because you're smart in economics doesn't mean you're going to be smart in, science, right?
Absolutely. Just because you want your body to do something doesn't mean it's going to do it.
Or that you can process information quickly. Some guys it never clicks for them. Chance shows that he has that. And so, but now you see he was always a smooth athlete. That is the one thing I could see. He was very fluid. His transitions were smooth. And that's why I was worried that maybe that he was so fluid that masked his speed. Sure. Does that make sense, Vince? Yeah. Like, sometimes a guy can be so effortless in what he's doing,
you don't realize how fast he's actually going. Yeah.
And I've said that about, like, Tobias Merriweather, but for a corner that can be a little harder because he's never just running vertically.
Right.
And so that was my issue with Chance, but I've always kind of said, I have a feeling I may be wrong about this one. I can't change my view of that, of what I see, because I have to evaluate what I see on film. But I've always felt in the back of my mind, like, I think I'm getting this one wrong. I just feel like I'm going to get this one wrong. And again, it's early yet, and he still has a lot to prove, and it's, he's still got to put the pads on and, do all that kind of stuff. But the early returns are that he has been very impressive so far in summer camp, and that he's a guy that's going to also have a chance to push. Look, if the veterans at Notre Dame and the secondary do not have good fall camps, there are freshmen that are going to beat them out. That's just flat out what I'm hearing, and then what I think based on evaluating players. And I think Chance Tucker's another one of those guys. And I think Jojo Johnson's one of those guys, but Jojo's is a little different because he doesn't have the one thing that all those other guys have, and that's size.
Okay.
He's 5'10". He's not long. I mean, he's long for a 5'10" guy, but he's not long relative to the other guys. And the other part that's gonna hurt Jojo a little bit as a freshman, he's still very new to corner. I mean, Vince didn't really start focusing on defense until he was a senior, and you saw the film.
I did.
He was just getting by on athleticism.
100%.
Now, it's
and you can do that
athleticism
in the area that he grew up. I mean, the place where he was playing, you can get by with athleticism without much of an issue if you're an athlete like he is.
And he's a very good athlete.
And he was a late add to the class, right? He was one of the last guys to come in.
He actually committed to Marcus Freeman at Cincinnati.
Okay, that's right. I do remember that.
Right. So Marcus Freeman's the one that convinced JoJo to play defense. JoJo showed up at Notre Dame in 2019, that same year that Gabriel Rubio and Blake Fisher were on campus, and he was working out as a receiver.
Right.
I really liked him. I wrote about him at the time. I just said, I don't know if he has the size to do what Notre Dame wants the receivers to do. And he wasn't at the time. Again, he was a sophomore at the time. He wasn't a guy that was necessarily super explosive then, like, burner speed. He was very fluid. He had really quick feet. He was more quick than fast. That old expression. He was more quick than fast. Well, in the last year and a half since then, his speed took off. Now, the problem is he didn't grow at all. But Marcus Freeman's
I don't know what that's like.
The Marcus Freeman's the one that saw him, and the staff at Cincinnati was like, look, we think you need to play defense. And so he committed to Cincinnati to play defense. And then when he started playing defense and people realized that he was open to playing defense, that's when schools like Notre Dame and those kind of schools started getting involved. Now, I was told this. I was told that Notre Dame – so I thought that Notre Dame expressed interest, and that's when JoJo decommitted. I was told that Notre Dame was not going to talk to JoJo as a committed player to Cincinnati. That Mike Mickens and the defensive staff were like –
just too much respect for Cincinnati. I mean,
exactly. and for that guys. Relationship.
Yeah,
so it's like, sure. Look, but as soon as JoJo decommitted from Cincinnati, because it was other Power 5 schools getting involved with him that caused him to decommit from Cincinnati.
Okay.
And then as soon as that happened, Mike Mickens and the Notre Dame staff got on the phone and were like, come here. Well, once that happened, it was done. Yeah. JoJo always wanted to go to Notre Dame.
Okay.
That was his dream school. I mean, that's where he wanted to go. And so to see that happen, once Notre Dame got in the mix, it was like, done deal.
So it wasn't a situation where he committed to Marcus Freeman at Cincinnati. Marcus Freeman came to Notre Dame and said, hey, you need to come with me.
No.
It wasn't that type of thing. It's just a kind of a happy coincidence that was
correct.
Kind of how it went down.
Correct. Because, I mean, if JoJo signed before Marcus Freeman was here.
Oh,
yeah. I mean,
of course he did. Yeah. Of course he did. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, he committed to Notre Dame.
I was getting the timeline all mixed around in my head. Yeah,
you're he committed to Notre Dame last November. Marcus Freeman was still coaching Cincinnati.
You're right.
This was the deal where Mike Mickens is the one that went and got him.
10-4. Yep, you're right.
Yeah. So
I don't know why I was.
And then, of course, it's more of Marcus Freeman followed JoJo to Notre Dame. It's kind of how it works, So,
good point.
But he's an interesting kid because he's still learning the position, and so I don't quite have the optimism for him that I do for the others in regards to playing early because of that. However, what JoJo has is a lot of heart, a great work ethic, and he is athletic. And when you have that, there's a chance on an unproven depth chart that you could surprise some people. I could also see JoJo. He's the most niche of all those guys. He's the most, he could really fit into this niche right here as a nickel, against certain teams. Hey, when you're playing North Carolina and you're playing USC and they're throwing the ball all over the field, you're going to play him. And it reminds me a lot of Tariq Bracy.
Okay.
Remember, Tariq Bracy was mostly an offensive player in high school. He was a dominant running back in high school. Played corner, but he just played corner and he just got by on athleticism. I thought Tariq was going to need a year to develop, but then he gets to Notre Dame and they had to play him as a freshman because he was the fastest other than Troy Pride. He was the second fastest corner. He's the best athlete other than Troy Pride, and he was the best natural cover guy. So they had to play him. I could see that, and it was in certain teams. It was against USC. It was against Florida State with all the receivers they had. He didn't play all the time. I could see JoJo kind of fitting into that role, where when you're playing a team, like a USC, like a North Carolina, those teams that want to spread the field and get a lot of athletes on the field, that maybe that's a game where we might see a JoJo play.
Okay.
But I would think that maybe he might need a year just because of the lack of experience playing defensive back. But if JoJo picks that part up quickly, then he could force his way in the field in sort of that niche, sort of nickel type of cover guy role. But he's the one that I would say I'm probably least likely to play, and it's not about his talent or athleticism. It's about the size combined with
technique.
The size won't be an issue once the technique comes. But when you're smaller and the technique and the instincts aren't there from an experiential standpoint, then you can really get in trouble because you can't make – like if Ryan Barnes makes a mistake, he's 6'3", he can make up for it.
Yeah.
JoJo can't. If he makes a mistake, he's just going to get beat.
5-inch difference, yeah.
Right. Well, 5 inches of height plus
length.
Another 3-4 inches at least in arm length.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm interested to see what JoJo can do, because he is kind of a quote unquote local kid, right? So he's got a special place in my heart. I want to see how he competes and things of that nature. And so I think that would be fun to see him get on the field against like a USC or a UNC and see him run around with those guys, because just from a straight athletic ability standpoint, he can run with anybody. It's just a matter of the technique. And you're right. Doesn't matter how good of an athlete you are. If somebody gets you on technique, they're going to get you. So that's something he's going to have to get down. And since he was not an early enrollee, he's behind the 8 ball just a little bit,
right? A little bit,
just a little bit. So,
but you talk about Vince. It's okay. So objectively speaking, as an analyst, I said what I said about what JoJo can play.
Okay.
As a coach, as sort of a fan of the game, these are the kind of kids I tend to root a little bit more for.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he is that guy that wanted to be at Notre Dame and they didn't want him, and he went to Cincinnati, but he kept working, he earned that offer in a way that most kids don't. And I don't know. I just always kind of have a soft spot for those kind of situations. But at the same time, he's not Rudy, right?
Yeah,
this kid can play.
He got a scholarship.
This kid didn't get a scholarship because he's local. This kid got a scholarship because he can play, and they liked him. And the fact that the new defensive coordinator wanted him at this previous place, I think says a lot about how Marcus Freeman thinks. Now, what that role is, we don't know.
Sure.
But Marcus Freeman, who has very long corners at Cincinnati, thought this kid could play in his defense.
Right.
To the point where he convinced him to not play offense and come play defense. So I think that's the other thing that gives you confidence if you're someone who likes JoJo and follows JoJo that he's going to get a chance to play, because the D coordinator and the cornerbacks coach both view him as a guy that fits what they're trying to do.
So we had a saying when I was doing podcasts with Lou. It was in Clark Lee we trust. Right. And whatever he said as far as linebackers go, like, he's earned the right to be like, okay, we got you.
Right.
I'm starting to get on board with that way of thinking for Marcus Freeman and what he said. Like, look, he normally gets long, tall, athletic corners, but he wanted JoJo at Cincinnati.
Right.
And of course he would have wanted him at Notre Dame as well. And maybe he doesn't fit that mold, but if Marcus Freeman says that he does, then okay. Oh, okay. I'm there. Right. It's like I'm getting to that point with Marcus Freeman, and again, I am trying to take your advice, and I'm pumping the brakes a little, but there's
the one difference too, Vince, is when Clark Lee took over as the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, he had never been a defensive coordinator before. So
that's
we saw him doing a good job developing linebackers at Wake Forest, right, with the group he had there, and then of course at Notre Dame. But Marcus Freeman kind of comes with a more proven track record. So I understand jumping on board right away. But the fact of the matter is, JoJo is going to get a chance. The point is, JoJo's going to get a chance to prove it. He's not just some local kid that's a great story. The kid can play, and he's going to get a chance to play. I just think at the end of the day, it's probably going to be, and just again, my prediction that it's going to be one of those times where it takes a little bit longer, because he has a couple things working against him that you can't change in a week.
Yeah.
And that is the fact that he is someone who JoJo's not going to be 6'1" by the end of fall camp. There's no like stretching program that makes him 6'1". Otherwise, I would have been a Division I quarterback, because I would have stretched myself to be 6'4". Right. He is what he is. He can't just make up experience of not playing corner in summer workouts. He's going to need that time.
Sure.
And so he's one of the few DBs that I look at as a possible 5-year guy. And I rarely say that. And it's because of the size, but it's also mainly because of just the lack of experience playing defensive back. That's really what it boils down to for me. So usually I say don't redshirt DBs. There's no point in redshirting, because if a guy's coming back as a 5th-year senior, you don't want him coming back as a 5th-year senior. It's rare. And those rarities usually happen when there's coaching changes. So like Harrison Smith was a 5th-year guy. Well, that's because the previous coaching staff wasted him at linebacker for 2 years, right? And then you had the coaching change, and So there was a circumstance behind it.
Right.
Normally, you don't see fifth-year DBs that come back that you would actually want, or an injury, or like a guy like a Matthias Farley, who I think was a 5-year guy, but he was also a 5-year guy that was a receiver in high school and didn't play football. He was a soccer player growing up. He didn't play, so there's usually those circumstances for guys that play 5 years that you would actually want to. I mean, there's a lot of DBs that would want to come back for a 5th year. Mm-hmm. Usually they're not good enough at a place like Notre Dame to want to bring them back as a 5th year. It happens, but it's usually not the case. Yeah. Nick McLeod. The only reason Nick McLeod was a 5th year last year was because he got hurt at NC State the year before. Otherwise, he'd have been done in 2019.
And he'd have been in the NFL. I mean,
right.
He'd been doing his thing. Yeah.
Right. And so that's where I see JoJo is he's a guy that I actually would like to see save a year because I think his best football is certainly ahead of him.
Now, as we move to the safety position, this is where the depth chart, again, I guess you could say it about DBs in general, but the depth chart at safety, I think, provides some potential opportunity for some young guys to get an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where you want to start, but I'll throw Justin Walter out there. Is it Walters?
Walters.
Thank you. Justin Walters out there. He was an early enrollee, if I'm not mistaken. So he got kind of a head start on things. What are you hearing about him? And do you think that, he could potentially be a guy who could crack the 2 deep? I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for sure, at least looking at the depth chart.
If you'd have told me in January that whether or not Justin Walters is going to play as a freshman, I said no.
Okay.
He's 175 pounds, and he didn't play as a senior because of COVID, right? So I said no. He was a kid that I liked. I liked Justin Walters when Notre Dame got him. It was a very good pickup, 3.5-star guy, 4-star upside, a guy that I thought in time could be a good player. He's got to develop his technique. He's got to develop a couple of those other kind of things, but he was going to need some time to get the necessary size. Well, then he comes out in the spring and he's listed at $178. I'm thinking, okay, well, he's undersized. Then you look at him and you say, this kid's chiseled. Like, this kid is ripped. And then you realize he doesn't play like a 178-pounder. Yeah. He doesn't hit like a 178-pounder. And then you say, okay, well, this size isn't going to be a problem for him to be at least a rotation player. Can he cover? Well, then he makes plays in coverage all spring. We saw it in multiple practice clips where Justin was making plays on the ball. Then he picks off Drew Pine in the blue gold game. And now I'm thinking, yeah, I think he's going to have a chance to play as a freshman. He can hit. He can run the alleys. He's good in coverage from what we've seen. And he's a kid that's going to put in the work. And so when you consider how thin the depth chart is as far as proven experience, he's going to have a shot to crack that lineup. Now, is it going to be hard? Yeah, because DJ Brown's a veteran.
Sure.
You obviously have Houston Griffith and Kyle Hamilton. I think are going to be starters. DJ's a veteran. KJ Wallace is an ascending player. I think KJ's going to have a chance to play. I think Litchfield Ashevon's a guy to keep an eye on. I mean, so there's 5 safeties there that, could play for Notre Dame this year. So the freshmen aren't just going to slide in and play because there's nobody there. They're going to have to earn it.
Sure.
Justin, I think, is a guy that I would not have said this about 6 months ago, but I'll say this about now, that I think he's going to have a chance with a really good fall camp to earn a job. Now, where I think Justin could end up playing as a freshman is on a special teams or two. That's where I could really see him, and Kerry G we'll get into, making an impact. And that's also where we could see guys like Chance Tucker and Phillip Reilly and Ryan Barnes having some roles is on special teams as well. But I think Justin, with his speed and his willingness to hit and his tackling ability, I could see him being a guy that at the very least could go. And just a little quick FYI, Darren Agu, who decommitted to Notre Dame, just committed to Vanderbilt a couple minutes ago. So
that's the school I kept hearing.
I want to talk about that when we're done. Okay. I want to talk about that when we're done because it's So we're gonna chat about that.
Okay.
Not some nuggets. I have some thoughts. I have some opinions on that.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So Justin Walters is a guy that I think he's that kind of guy that, him and Kerry G both are that guy that I think Brian Polian's going to be like, knocking on the door of Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens and Chris Lillard saying, hey, what do you guys think about me, taking that red shirt off of so-and-so so I can have him on special teams, because that's his job, right? He's got to figure out to put the best guys he can to have good special teams. And
sometimes he has to lobby some position coaches to
100%.
I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
That's what you did for Bo Bauer in 2018. That's what you had to do for Shane Simon in 2018 because they weren't playing a linebacker.
Right.
They were only playing, they burned eligibility just playing special teams.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, Bo plays a lot. He just doesn't start.
Right. True. I will say overall, I think Notre Dame does a good job of allowing guys to play special teams. I mean, I think they do a pretty good job of that. But yeah, you're right. That's part of the job of Coach Polian. He's got to step up and he's got to ask permission pretty much.
If special teams isn't good, he can't say, well, it's because you redshirted a bunch of guys. It's not my fault. It's like, well, yeah, you're right, but you're still gone, so we're going to go hire somebody. He's got to do what he's got to do to get the special teams right. I mean, it's his only job, right? That's all he does. So he's got to get that group ready. And if he thinks a kid that's a freshman who isn't going to play can be a weapon for him, he's got to stand on the table and lobby for that guy. That's a figurative statement, not a literal statement. I don't see like Brian Polian standing on the coach's table like doing a little leprechaun dance. Yes. But I mean, coaches in Notre Dame. So get your head right, Vince. But I mean, that's his job. He's got to say, this guy can help me. And Brian Kelly has said this for years. If a kid can be a starter on special teams, he's a starter.
Yeah.
What I mean? Like that. Yeah. You can't say special teams is a third part of your team and then say, yeah, but we're not going to redshirt. We're going to redshirt a guy because he can't help us at linebacker, even though he can help us on special teams. You got to play him. Now, do you burn a red shirt for a guy to be a fullback on the kick return team only? No. You got to have more than two guys who can do that, right? You have to be able to find that somewhere. But if you're going to have a guy that's going to be a gunner, he's going to be on kick return, he's going to be kickoff coverage, and there's 3 units he's starting on, okay, then you take his red shirt off. I'm sorry, that's just what you have to do because he's helping you in football games.
Yep.
Right? And so I think Justin Walters can be that guy for sure, and so can Kerry G. So, and I know we got to talk more about Kerry G, but those two guys in the special teams conversation kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, no question. And you're right. And I think a lot of these guys that we're talking about, especially in the secondary, and look, you could add Prince Colley in there too, I'm sure. But I think a lot of those guys could give ample minutes on special teams. Mm-hmm. So, and there's also a way that you can take, a group of those guys and figure it out to where they're only going to play in 4 games. Right. Mm-hmm. And you kind of rotate,
which they did in 2019 with Maris Luafau and Osita Guano, remember?
Exactly. That's what I was going to get at. Because they've done it in the past. They've shown that they can do it.
Shut up and let you
it's okay.
finish your thought. My bad. I just got excited. Like, I know where he's going with this one.
But yeah, they've shown that they can do that. And then they just rotate those guys around. They still maintain the red shirt, but they still have solid play on special teams. So I would not be surprised if that is the kind of thing that they did this year, if they did want to redshirt some of those guys.
And if those guys earn that spot, which
absolutely.
I think they'll have a chance to do. Because that's where that lack of depth, some of the depth we've talked about, that's where some of that depth can be a problem.
Sure.
Is, do you have the depth on special? If you're lacking depth at linebacker and safety and corner, which from a returner standpoint, right? Not with the freshmen, but with the returners, they don't have the depth at those positions they've had in the last couple of years because Jack Lamb's gone, right? You've lost Sean Crawford, who was a guy that played a lot of special teams. You've lost a lot of those guys that were key special teams players for you. And so now you've got these younger guys stepping in. You lost Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who's a great special teams player for years. So there's a lot of your key special teams guys are gone. Now, some of them are back, Bo Bauer, Jordan Patelho, guys like that. But there's now roles for a lot of those guys to kind of step in and play. And so that's where I think that lack of depth could really open up a lot of opportunities for this freshman class, especially would be maybe they don't play a ton on defense. But everything that we said about what could lead them to not play a lot on defense is the opposite on special teams. I think there's a lot more opportunities for them to step up on special teams.
So did you want to expound on Kerry G, or do you want to jump into Darren?
No, I mean, do you want? See, you just want to talk about Darren Agu. So
I really do.
We're going to pass over a 6'3", 185-pound athletic safety from Georgia. Sure, sounds like a good plan, man.
It's written right there on my forehead. We're moving on.
No, I think if we bypass Kerry G, there'd be a lot of upset people in this chat because there's a lot of excitement about Kerry G.
Sure,
he has a very interesting backstory because he liked Notre Dame. Brian Smith, who used to write for us, still helps us with things at Irish Breakdown, but he's now running the Central Florida site for SI Maven. He told me very early on that this kid is a very high academic kid that likes Notre Dame. He wants Notre Dame, but Terry Joseph didn't spend any time on him. Just didn't recruit him. Well, I say that just because he's a safeties coach. I don't know if that was a Terry Joseph decision or if that was a Clark Lee decision.
Okay.
So enough. That was not a shot at Terry Joseph. That's just Terry Joseph would have been the primary recruiter for him had Notre Dame as a staff decided, because I take some shots at Terry Joseph, right? It's well known that I'm not fond of him. That was not an attempt at one. That was simply saying, as the safeties coach, he would have been the primary recruiter of them. Okay. Sure. But sometimes if your coordinator or your recruiting coordinator or the defensive coordinator says, hey, we don't want that guy, it doesn't matter if you want him or not. So
you can do about it. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that wasn't perceived as a shot on Terry Joseph. It may have been, it may have not. I don't know the reasons why Notre Dame decided not to recruit him. So I'm not blaming any one person. I'm saying, as a staff, they made a bad decision, in my opinion. They didn't recruit him. He ended up going to LSU. Well, LSU just doesn't take anybody to play DB. I mean, that is DBU right now, right? That's the team that has the moniker. Now, Ohio State's battling for that, but LSU has done a pretty darn good job of developing defensive backs the last decade. They recruited him. They got a commitment from him. Notre Dame caught a little bit of a break because the defense at LSU was a hot frigging mess this year. Almost the entire defensive staff is gone. That got Kerry G back on the market. Notre Dame then decided to wisely get involved, and they got him. Kerry G is, you want to talk about like the kind of Notre Dame kid that Notre Dame should be recruiting? He is it. Long, athletic.
Yeah, one of those top
great
kids.
High school. Yeah. Great academics, great family, wanted. Like, not only did he not, okay, yeah, Notre Dame's after me now, I guess I'll go there. He wanted Notre Dame to recruit him. And they just didn't. He is exactly the kind of player that I've always said there's a lot of guys like him that Notre Dame just doesn't recruit for some ungodly reason. Fortunately, Notre Dame caught some breaks last year. They made some recruiting mistakes that they were able to overcome because of what happened on the field with other teams. If LSU has a great defense last year and Bo Pelini still has a job down there and that secondary staff still has a job, Kerry G's probably signing with LSU. So I'm happy that they were a hot mess this year because that helped Notre Dame get Kerry G. Long, rangy, athletic. I don't see Rover yet in his future. A lot of people said maybe he could be a Rover. I don't see that yet. I'm giving him a chance to play safety. I also think that when you talk about G and Walters, and we've talked a lot about corner, but if it was just the corners that the staff liked, I think they'd want more than one safety in this class. The fact that Notre Dame has basically backed off all but one safety in the class says also it says a lot about the corners they've recruited, but it also, I think, says a lot about what they think about Kerry G and Justin Walters. If they weren't impressed by what they saw from those kids so far, I don't think that they would have backed off all the safeties that they did. I think they said, boy, we're going to need at least another safety in this class.
Right.
The fact that they're now all their eggs in the Xavier Nwankpa basket, knowing they could miss on him, says that there's a lot of confidence that they don't feel that they need to go get another guy just to get a guy. They like what's there. And it's not just about the potential of moving corners. It's about those two freshmen as well. And I think Kerry G is one of those guys who can play center field as a cover one guy, Vince. I think he can run the alleys as a run defender. I think he can cover tight ends. I think he can cover backs. I need to see if he can cover slots or not. That's the one question I have. But in all those other things, I think Kerry G has a very high ceiling. I didn't grade him as high as some of the other guys in the class because he's still got some physical development that's needed. He's got some technical things that are needed. But from an upside standpoint, Vince, he was a very, very good pickup. There's a lot of tools to work with Kerry G.
Well, I'm excited to see what Walters and G can do, even if it's just on special teams, because look, there's a chance that there'll be two brand new starting safeties in 22, right? I mean, I believe Houston Griffith can come back for another year, but there's no guarantee.
I would hope that Houston comes back. But yes,
I would hope so too.
You're correct. There's no guarantee he comes back.
Right. I mean, let's say he has a banner year and he looks across the way and he's like, look, Kyle Hamilton's leaving. This might be my best opportunity. Or maybe he says that exact same thing and says, hey, now I can be the man at safety. So I mean, there's a bunch of different scenarios.
Or he doesn't play well and Notre Dame doesn't want him back. I mean, there's multiple scenarios in which he doesn't come back. Maybe he gets injured. I mean, there's a lot of things that could factor into, whether or not you're going to want to bring him in.
Yeah, so there's a chance that you've got two brand new starting safeties next year. And if you're looking at the depth chart, I think that Walters and G have a great opportunity to make some noise this year and put their name in the hat. You know what I mean? I'm not predicting that they're going to both start, But, it's going to be wide open,
right,
is what I would say.
And they don't even necessarily have to play on defense to fill that void. I mean, if they're special team standouts, that's going to put them in position to say, hey, look, they've played in front of the big crowds. They've had to execute assignments. They've had to play physical football.
Right.
They haven't played it a lot at safety, but that's what spring practice is for. That's what fall workouts are for. That's what next year's fall camp is for. So I just feel like that. I don't think Notre Dame recruits the way that they have on defense in this class if they didn't have some confidence in them. So it's kind of like, we'll take the stud who'd be our best, most talented safety the minute he steps foot on campus in Xavier Nwankpa. But after that, kind of like where we're at. We'd rather get another linebacker or another corner, another DB or another D lineman than to take a second safety or even one safety if they don't get Nwankpa.
Right.
So it's to me, it says a lot about where they view those guys. So, it's exciting to. I mean, if you think about it, it's like because that's a position, Vince, that has me concerned. I mean, they struck out at safety in 2020. And you look at 2019, your stud safety from that class, one of your two safeties from that class is gone after this year. Let's be honest. And then the other safety from that class, Litchfield Agevon, I don't think he's played a snap of defensive football in 2 years. So
no, not that.
So you're looking at the depth chart and you're saying, there's not a lot there, and yet they're still not bringing in any. And then 2021, they got the two guys they got. So then you look in 22 and say, well, man, they're just not really. They don't seem to really care too much about adding safeties. It says that there's more afoot here, and it's not just the safety depth chart; it's also the corner depth chart. But just the corner depth chart's not going to make them potentially pass on safety in this class. To me, it tells me that they think really highly of those kids, no question. So that's going to do it for our podcast version of today's show. Obviously, we're going to have questions coming up here in a little bit, but that's going to wrap up sort of the breakout players for defense. It's going to be a really fun fall, Vince, to really evaluate those guys and to really see how they pan out, who steps up. I'm really looking forward to seeing this group. I think offensively, we kind of have an idea of who's going to play.
I agree. There's
some really good depth here, and there's some like a corner, like which corner steps up, which safety steps up, where are they going to play Prince Colley? Is Gabriel going to be more of a nose or a three technique? There's a lot of questions and intriguing options there that make me say I'm really looking forward to seeing what this group of defensive players can do as freshmen. And a lot of them were undervalued, underrated guys that I for me personally, this is just me personally. Okay, was I right about this kid or not? And this is going to be our first chance to really see that. And so that's also something I'm looking forward to. So obviously, if you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. If you are in the YouTube channel, we're not going anywhere yet, so hang around. But for this portion of the podcast, leave us a like, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this with your Notre Dame friends and family. Man, Vince, the last couple of days has been amazing. We've already had over 100 people sign up in about 24 hours for the message board. We're still got people buying the merch. So it's just a lot of exciting times going on. So I appreciate her being part of it. But, of course, and tomorrow we'll be back to preview Purdue and Toledo. And, of course, on Friday we'll have our Friday mailbag. So for this portion of the show, that's Vince. I'm Brian. Thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to you again very, very soon. And so that's it for that podcast portion. So, Vince, you want to just dive right into the Darren Agu stuff. So,
yes, I do. I'm very intrigued to see what you have to say here.
So it was very clear to me from sources I've talked to, but then also Darren Agu's own comments and the fact that he committed 3 days later.
He's going to say
to Vanderbilt. That there was some, I don't want to say negative recruiting, like Notre Dame sucks or those guys can't, but more of like a,
hey man, look at the depth chart.
Yeah, like some negative stuff there to try to flip a kid, and it's exact opposite of what we talked about with the cornerback staff and Jojo Johnson.
Right.
Like, exactly. They refused to offer a kid that the cornerbacks coach came from out of respect for the place that gave him an opportunity. It was also his alma mater, right? So it's a little different. But here's the exact opposite. It's I don't care I don't care if you gave me a defensive coordinator job. I'm going to try to flip your kid.
Yeah.
That's a little bit
yeah, it feels it feels icky. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, no, it's not wrong.
It just feels icky, and I have a hard time believing that Clark Lee would do that, but I
don't think it was Clark Lee that was necessarily doing that.
Yeah, but he's the head coach, though, right?
Yeah, but he's not listening to every phone conversation
that's
happening.
No, you're right. You're right, but the buck stops at the head coach. That's all I'm saying.
But I don't think this is like a fireable offense or just unethical. It's just more of that's a little shady. It's not illegal. Right. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no rules to say you can't go after a kid. So, I mean,
there's not.
I'm not blaming Clark Lee for it. I mean, they need talented players, and this is a really talented player. So, I mean, I get it. It's just one of those things where I'm like, yeah, that's a little bit shaky to me. That's a little bit questionable for me. I'm not sure if I could have done that. But at the end of the day, their job is to win at Vanderbilt, not worry about what Notre Dame's doing. Yeah, but at the same time, it's just like, I don't know. It's kind of like when you leave a job, you're not supposed to recruit the guys that you coached. You're not supposed to go after them. Right. It's kind of like, you really going to like point out, try to negative recruiting can sometimes be you're saying bad things about a program, and negative can be what I think Vanderbilt did here with Darren Agu, which is, hey man, you're not gonna be able to play there. Look, it's not you're raw. Soon. Whatever the reason whatever the things they said to him to convince him he was going to play there and that they could play for them right away, it worked because he decommitted from Notre Dame on Sunday and publicly decommitted on Sunday, and now already in 3 days he's committed to Vanderbilt, a school he I don't believe visited. It tells me they were working on him for a while.
Yeah,
they didn't just call up on Friday and say, "Hey, man,
we heard you decommitted,"
or "Hey, we think you should decommit." This is something they've been working on for a while.
Yeah, that's
so. That's a little
shady.
Bit. It's
shady.
Yeah,
it's shady. Just call it what it is. It feels shady. I mean, I don't have any hard proof that that's what they did, but there's an awful lot of circumstantial evidence.
These are all opinions by us on that subject, but
no question.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
Yeah,
it doesn't sit right with me.
Right, exactly. So,
but no rules were broken. I'm not implying any of that.
Nothing illegal.
It's just more of a, I don't know, dude code violation. I guess is the best way I can say it. You know what I mean? Like
bro code.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Like we kind of gave you an opportunity to be a defensive coordinator here, and we did this, we did that, and just gonna go try to steal our recruits, huh? Okay. Now and again, that's not something that like for the rest of his career at Vanderbilt he can't do that. But like that first class, like.
Because you had to recruit against
him in uncommitted players, but it's a committed player. Like
he had to have a hand. He had to have talked to the young man,
at
some point, and established at least a relationship.
He definitely wanted them. I mean, Clark Lee's not like, wait a minute, what? We flipped a kid that was at Notre Dame? No way. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying,
I know it feels icky. I agree.
Yeah, it does. All
right. Let's jump into some Q&A here and comments for that matter. Domer Grizz is
if we do get lost, Vince, I don't know if you saw this.
I did see.
I screen chatted all the way to Ronald's super chat, so we can. If we get bumped, we can pull those up in the shared thing and show people them, even though we can't show them at the bottom. So we should be able to,
I see what you're saying.
Like you could do the video share or the file share and this picture share, so at least people can somewhat see the questions. We don't have to do that, but just you can also
give it a shot.
You can also just read them.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. But Domer Grizz is leading this thing off hot. And it's funny because I had this same question. And I think I may have mentioned it when you and I were talking about the podcast. But anyway, Domer Grizz says, you guys rock. Do you anticipate any repercussions for Freeman being so candid during his Zorich interview? I loved it, but was he a little too candid in revealing things that BK said or did? Didn't Bob Diaco make comments that led to BK's stance on keeping assistants away from the media? I'm actually surprised Freeman got approval to do the Zorich interview in the first place.
I think the fact that Domer Grizz is asking this question, and again, it's a good question.
It's a great question.
I think for me, speaks volumes about the manner in which Brian Kelly has kind of handled his assistants in recent years. You know what I mean? For me, Vince, when I look at it, it's Bob Diaco didn't just say things that maybe he didn't want to say. Bob Diaco was weird. He had some very, very strange comments.
He showed that when he became a head coach.
Yeah, he would just say that, what the heck is this guy talking about? Did he just start talking about Immanuel Kant? Is he seriously is he talking about Shakespeare right now? What in the world is he talking about? But I don't think it's necessarily that. I don't remember Brian Kelly's assistants talking a whole lot at Cincinnati either. I think that's just more about Brian Kelly wanting to be the spotlight. I would imagine that that's something that him and Marcus Freeman talked about during that transition of trying to hire him is what I would say more about it. I don't think, from my understanding of how it works, assistants just can't do interviews without letting the SID and people know. I mean, I've asked assistants, say, can we do a show? Can I do an interview about this? And like, yeah, I don't, got to go through so-and-so first. So it's not like Marcus Freeman's just making his own schedule. I would imagine Brian Kelly gave him some of that. And honestly, he better have given him that. So I just feel like I'd be shocked if that was something that Brian Kelly was unaware of. And honestly, if Brian Kelly's upset about that, that would be really foolish of Brian Kelly, because
I think to me,
I mean, okay, let me ask you this question.
Yeah, no,
of the same people in the Notre Dame media, meaning there's that one platform that just is nuts, that just Brian Kelly could win back-to-back national titles and they'll never be happy with him, right? We're not talking about those guys. I'm talking about like real media, like Irish Illustrated, BGI, the local newspaper, Chicago. I mean, the same people, right?
Right.
Who's the biggest critic of Brian Kelly in the media? Me. Me.
Sorry,
and that's not something. That's not a mantle I'm proud of. It's just that's my job.
Yeah,
but the point is, I took those comments not as shot things, but like I love that Brian Kelly said that.
Exactly.
Love that he said that. And so, like, to me, if Brian Kelly took that as a negative, it's like, dude, get over yourself. Get out of your own way. Like, this is great for you, because this is showing Notre Dame fans. There's a lot of Notre Dame fans that like Brian Kelly, but that don't believe that Brian Kelly really believes that he wants to truly compete for championships.
Yeah.
There are. When he says things like that, that negates that whole concern. He's all in. Well, I'm saying he's all in.
Yeah, no.
And I've been his biggest critic.
Yeah.
Those were great things. So I understand where Domer Grizz is coming from. But if Brian Kelly, if there are repercussions for that, that would be a very poor look on Brian Kelly. And would if I was Marcus Freeman, would say, is this really a guy that is this really a guy that's going to help me get a head coaching job? He doesn't even want me to do these things that I made him look good.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, because I think that made Brian Kelly look good.
I don't think Brian Kelly could have scripted it any better. Like, I don't think they went into this, hey, make sure you say this. Like, I don't think it was that kind of a thing. But looking back on it, if you're Brian Kelly, I don't think he could have looked any better coming out of that interview.
What was the first takeaway that I had, Vince, when I reached out to you?
It was, holy cow, Brian Kelly's, let's go. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's what it
wasn't Marcus Freeman's the next head coach.
No.
I believe that to be something that, I mean, I'm pumping the brakes on it because I want to see him coach, but like, I'm on board with that. If he's the coach that I think he's going to be, I'm on board with him being the next head coach, right?
Sure.
But my thing but Brian Kelly's head coach right now, and it's up to Brian Kelly to determine whether they're going to win right now.
It was raw, naked emotion from Brian Kelly that we haven't seen.
A pissed off Brian Kelly's at his best when he's pissed off.
Sure.
The problem is he's usually been pissed off at us or me.
Right.
And that doesn't cause him to make changes in the program.
Right.
When Brian Kelly's pissed off about where his program is or what he wants, that's when Brian Kelly's at his best.
Sure.
Because he's not worried about saying the right things. He's not worried about protecting feelings. He's worried about, screw you. I want a freaking ring. And I want a statue. I don't think Brian Kelly sits there in his office like, where would I put that statue of myself? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just talking about what comes with the champion. Sure. He wants the ring. He wants the title. He wants the status of, I won a championship at a place that nobody thought you could win a championship at anymore. Well, national media wise.
Of course.
I think that's where this is coming from. And that showed. And what did I say, Vince? What did we both say? I wish Brian Kelly would say things like that publicly.
Right.
Exactly. There's a lot of fans that love the job Brian Kelly has done as head coach that don't like Brian Kelly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's because we don't see this part of Brian Kelly. There's a lot of people that don't think Brian Kelly loves Notre Dame. These things to me are endearing. They make me respect him more. They make me think that he's serious about this, not just someone who's kind of like, I've done a good job and I want the all-time wins record and that's all that matters to me.
Right, exactly.
No, this tells me that Brian Kelly doesn't give a rip about passing Knute Rockne for wins. This tells me that Brian Kelly wants a ring, and that's all that matters. And so I hope that Brian Kelly took those comments as like, hey, you know what? I said it. Cool. I'll own it.
Right.
Because it makes him look good.
Great. And it makes him look great.
Yes.
And he didn't even have to say it. Like, it was said
I want a pissed off Brian Kelly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do. Because I think a pissed off Brian Kelly is going to do whatever he needs to do, changes offensive, hiring defense, whatever, staff building, whatever I got to do. We're close. I want that stinking ring, and I'm sick of losing to those teams.
Yeah.
Okay, so then do something about it. And that's what he's doing.
He hired Marcus Freeman.
That's exactly.
And doing other.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And he said, hey, Marcus, I'm sick of looking at those teams. Go get me players that can help us win that.
Exactly. Yep.
That's what you hire.
Let me know what I need to do to close.
And that's kind of my frustration with all this stuff about, look, I think Marcus Freeman deserves all the credit he's getting. But where I get frustrated is but he's not out there doing this all by himself. And if Notre Dame goes out and wins a title, it's not like, as one guy did it all. I mean, Brian Kelly hired him.
Absolutely.
Right? Brian Kelly's the one that did the work to get him here. And if that works, then Brian Kelly deserves the credit for that. Then Marcus Freeman deserves the credit for what he did as a defensive coordinator, and Mike Mickens should get the credit for what he's doing as the cornerbacks coach, and Mike Elson should get the credit for what he's doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like Notre Dame could get like an offensive line commit tomorrow and be like, I guarantee you Marcus Freeman called this guy. Like, that's kind of how it's getting right now. And it's like, Marcus Freeman's doing a great job, but Brian Kelly, and so to me, this was the thing that made this interview made Marcus Freeman look great. Mm-hmm. And it made him look like a guy that fans are going to love. But Marcus Freeman gave us a glimpse into Brian Kelly's psyche that Brian Kelly won't give us. And it made Brian Kelly look great, in my opinion. Did. So I hope that that's how Brian Kelly took it. And I hope that it's an example of Brian Kelly saying, you know what, I need to let Tom, because I think Tommy Rees, when he talked in the spring, did great.
I loved everything he said too. Yeah.
And just his presence. I'd like to see those two guys talk more. I think Mike Elston does a great job in front of the camera. I'd like to see those guys talk more. I would. Now, whether or not Brian Kelly's going to let him or not, I don't know.
Well, he likes to be the face. I mean, I get that too.
Right. And he's the head coach. I get it. But I want to see that, because I think that's going to help him down the road with hire other coaches. Because hey man, we're going to give you that spotlight. We're going to give you that opportunity. And this is a great opportunity for him to do that. And he in Marcus Freeman's comments to me made Brian Kelly more likable.
Yep.
And showed me a side of Brian Kelly that I was hoping was there, but wasn't sure was. And I hope Brian Kelly took it that way.
Paul Benoit. Got it right this time, Brian. Paul Benoit says, I recently watched highlights of CJ Williams, and all I see is a guy who has trouble getting separation. He can climb over people to get the ball, but little separation. What am I missing?
I mean, I can't tell you what you're missing, Paul. I don't see that. I mean, I see a guy that at times doesn't get separation, but you have to understand, CJ Williams is playing against arguably the best competition in the country. He's not – if he was playing against some of the competition that other guys that are national recruits are playing, he'd be getting separation. He's going against guys like Jaden Mickey. He's going against D1 football players. So he's not going to have typical high school separation. I watched video of him at a 7-on-7 recently. He's getting separation. But also I think that that's not necessarily a style of play. He's not Will Fuller. And as I've said before, what fans have to understand about receiver play, and this is one of those things that people miss, which is why we've seen a lot of receivers that aren't fast go to college without the pro pedigree, or maybe not go to the NFL without the speed pedigree, that end up being great players. Juju Smith-Schuster, after 3 years of college and spending months of training just to be fast as he can be for the pro day and combine, ran a mid 4.5. DeAndre Hopkins ran a 4.57, right? Cooper Kupp ran a 4.6. Michael Thomas ran a borderline 4.6. These are phenomenal play. You watch Michael Thomas in the NFL, is he gaining 5 steps of separation all the time? No. He's just getting open. It's about body positioning. It's about back shoulder. It's about winning those contested throws. That's what you're asking him to do. You're not asking him to run by people and get separation. So it's like, I was talking with a friend of mine in the evaluation business, and we were talking about Chris Tyree, and he was telling me why he's not assigned on Chris Tyree. Well, I don't know if he can be a 20 carry guy. So, well, you're not recruiting him to be a 20 carry guy. If you're recruiting to be a 20 carry guy, then you're not recruiting him correctly. You're recruiting him to be a home run hitter, to do on 10 carries what most guys can do on 20. You know what I mean? And the same thing with CJ. What are you recruiting CJ to do? I'm recruiting him to move the chains, be good in the red zone, use his body and positioning to do that. I'm recruiting Tobias Merriweather and Xavier Bradshaw to get separation. So I think that's the other thing too, Paul, is having understanding of what are the expectations of what his role would be and what his strengths are. But at the same time, I would say I don't I don't see that. I mean, I watched this film. I had a couple, but I don't see what you see in CJ. So when someone I know and respect, and this, Paul, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about like conversations I had in the past. When someone I know and respect in the evaluation business says they don't see something, I'm going to go look at it again, right? But I'm like, yeah, I don't see what you see, right? I see a guy that gets enough separation to make plays, but his separation is not going to look like separation from a lot of other people because of the competition he's going against. I mean, he's going to play 2-3 ranked teams a year. He's playing kids from LA. He's playing top teams around the country. They played IMG his sophomore year, I believe, correct? Didn't they beat IMG his sophomore year? So this is a kid that to me is, I mean, he's an outstanding football player. But I also don't believe he's the number 29 player in the country, like Rivals has him. I mean, I think he's very good. I think he's more in the 75 to 90 range for me than he is in the top 25 to 40 range. And so partly because of he's not an elite guy, but, you know, you got to think about what are you asking CJ Williams to do? And what I would ask him to do as a college football player, he's really good at, and it translates to the next level.
Brent has a good question here. He says, is it easier to start a young player on defense than it is on offense from a playbook and schematic perspective? I want to take a stab at this one, Brian, and I'll then hand it off to you. I think on normal football teams, and I'm going to exclude Notre Dame, I think it's easier for – it just says young player, and so it doesn't really say position-wise. So we were talking about all the positions today. I'll say, you know, since it's the position of turmoil at Notre Dame, I'll say wide receiver, DB, okay? I think it's easier to start at wide receiver or play at wide receiver than it is to play at DB. That's me personally because – I'm not giving the entire playbook. That's not how I would run my offense. Okay. I would find, okay, what are the 3 routes this kid runs really well? I'm putting him out there for those 3 routes. He's going to do those really well. I can get him on the field. I think defense is a little bit different. You're not putting guys on the field for like 3 plays. If you're talking about the secondary, if you're talking about linebacker, potentially, you could, but I think there's more to learn defensively, in my opinion. And on top of that, you don't know what the offense is going to do. So that you have to know more from a defensive standpoint, in my opinion, to play defense. Offense, I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm going to run this route, right? I know going in what I'm going to do. That, to me, makes it easier for a young player to get on the field. Now, I think the answer might be different at Notre Dame, but that's how it is. That's, in my opinion, how it would be if I was running a team.
I just, honestly, Brent, it's a very good question. I think it depends on the program. I think it depends on the system you play. I think some of these air raid systems are really easy for offensive guys to get on the field. Just because, I mean, you go watch KD. I had this conversation when KD Cannon and Will Fuller, or not KD Cannon, I'm sorry, Corey Coleman and Will Fuller were coming out of college at the same time. Well, I said, I'll take Will Fuller over Corey Coleman every day of the week because Corey Coleman lines up on one side of the field and runs 5 routes. Like as a junior, that just was the Baylor offense. They just didn't run. I mean, 5 routes, maybe 8. I mean, I was, hyperbolic. I remember counting that year, and I think I counted like Corey Coleman ran like 8 or 9 routes. Will Fuller ran like 24 different route variations of a routes that year. And I said, this kid is going to be like a lot of these other air raid guys that he doesn't know how to play receiver in the NFL. You can't just line up on one side, play with 1 foot up, and most of your breaks are happening one way. All your speed cuts are going one direction. You've never done a speed cut to your right, kind of thing. You're going to get the NFL and have problems. And guess what? Corey Coleman had some problems. A lot of those Baylor kids have had problems. There's been some good ones. Josh Gordon was really good, but a lot of these air raid guys go to the NFL and take some adjustment.
Sure.
Right? So I think it just depends. And then there's other systems where, like Notre Dame, where playing as a receiver is challenging as a freshman because there's so much is asked. Same thing on defense. If you're a team that plays cover 1 and you're going to play a lot of man coverage and you've got some really athletic freshmen, he doesn't have to know but 2 coverages, right? I mean, so it just depends on the position. Honestly, I think in today's game, I don't think it's necessarily easier on either side of the ball. I think there's a couple positions where it can be harder to play freshmen. And a lot of it comes down to just size and strength. I think offensive line, it's a little harder to play a freshman just because of the strength and the technique and the advanced knowledge that's required. I think quarterback is harder for freshmen. And I think defensive tackle can be harder for freshmen. But those are just about size and strength than it is about anything else. Offensive line's a bit of a unique thing. That's why we don't see a lot of freshmen starting and thriving as offensive line because there's so much more involved fundamentally. But I think the way that the game of football has gone the last 5 to 8 years, good coaches are able to get freshmen on the field a lot easier than they did back in the day when it was so much more driven by the schemes and the X's and O's and all those kind of things. I think this era of get the athletes and get them out there and teach them how to play has been good for the game. That's why you're seeing more and more teams win with younger players.
Right.
Clemson won a national title in 2018 with a true freshman at quarterback. Their number 2 receiver that year was a true freshman. Their number 1 receiver that year was a true sophomore, and their starting running back was a true sophomore. And I think they had a couple young guys in the offensive line. They had some young guys on defense. I mean, that was a pretty young football team on offense, and they went out and won a national championship, scored 30 points on a pretty good Notre Dame defense, scored 37 points on Alabama offensively. They had a defensive touchdown that game to get to 44. I think their first touchdown of the game, or second touchdown of the game, was A.J. Terrell taking that pick back. So that's why I say 37, not 40. They won 44-16, but they had a defensive touchdown. So I think in this era, it's easier to get them at both. I think there's just a couple positions where it can be harder. Linebacker is another one, I think, where it can be a little more tough for a freshman to go on the field because it's such more of an intellectual that just a lot of freshmen can struggle to kind of just digest. You just don't see a ton of freshmen dominating or playing great as rookies like you see at secondary, receiver, tight end. I think tight end's a little bit of an easier position to play as a freshman now because so many more teams are getting tight ends away from the line. So that's what I would say.
Han Solo, with the talent on defense we currently have and coming in next year on defense, do you think we have what it takes to stop or severely stall Ohio State's offense when we face them next year? And he's got a follow-up. He says, and do you think we have and will have the talent on offense to beat them?
I don't think Notre Dame's problems from this point moving forward, really I'll just say it because we'll just look for it. From now on, if Notre Dame's not beating certain teams, it's not because they don't have talent. Now, are there going to be teams that have better talent than Notre Dame top to bottom? Yes. But to me, the talent is such that Notre Dame can still beat those teams. Are they going to beat Alabama 8 out of 10 times? No. 10 years ago, could they beat Alabama 1 out of 10 times? Probably. Could they beat Alabama now 4 out of 10 times? Yeah. 5 out of 10 times? Maybe. They're getting closer to that. And that's the thing. You only got to beat them once. You don't have to beat them 9 out of 10 times. And the talent is there to do that. Now, what I say that right now with Notre Dame's talent that they're going to go on the road and beat Ohio State in the opener of a season? No, it's not. But I would say the same thing about every other team in the country. I would pick every team to lose to Ohio State at home, at Ohio State's home. I'd pick Alabama to lose at home to Ohio State.
That's tough.
Just like I would pick Ohio State to lose at Alabama or at Clemson or at Notre Dame. So do they have the talent to do it, Han? I agree. I think they do. I think they're going to have the defensive line talent. I think they're going to have the speed on the back end of the defense. I think they're going to have the playmakers on offense. I think their offensive line is going to be a lot more experienced. Now, there's going to be a lot of question marks that Notre Dame's going to have. There's a lot of questions that Ohio State's going to have. They're going to lose They're going to lose 2 stud receivers after this year. They're going to lose Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave most likely. Chris Olave is a senior. Garrett Wilson's a junior, but he's probably going to be a first-round draft pick. They're going to lose at least 2 of their offensive linemen that are studs. Thayer Mumford's going to probably be gone. I would imagine Nicholas Pettit-Frere is going to be gone. Zach Harrison's probably going to be gone. There's some other really good players from that defense that are going to be gone after next year, so they're going to have some questions going into 2022 as well, just like Notre Dame will. But do I think Notre Dame has the talent to play with and beat Ohio State? Yeah, because it's on the road where they have to maybe get a couple breaks, earn a couple breaks, take advantage of some mistakes. Sure. And, Notre Dame may be breaking in a new quarterback at that time. That's another part of it. But do I think that they can hang with Ohio State and on defense limit Ohio State? Absolutely they do, especially since Ohio State's going to be losing 2 of their stud receivers. Now, Ohio State is in absolute reload mode at wide receiver. So they're not going to be, they're not going to be putting neophytes out there who can't play. They're going to be putting dudes out there. But still, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are really, really good.
Not going to be holding any fundraisers for the wide receiving core.
No, we're in trouble. No, there's not a lot of teams recruiting wide receiver better than Ohio State right now.
No telethons.
No.
All right. Matty K55 says, I love Rubio. He's such a beast up front, and I think he's so well-rounded, whether it's run stopping or pass rushing. Yeah. I really like Rubio.
Agree.
Yeah. You're preaching to the choir here, my friend. Yeah,
that's good analysis, though. I think we didn't really talk enough about this, but Matty K made a great point. Gabriel's a really good all-around player. He's not just like a run stuffer or a pass rusher. He's a really strong all-around player that's Good insight, Maddie. Very much.
Irish 812. Hey guys, really excited for Marcus Freeman's defense, but what do you see as the biggest weakness in his style of play? It seems that our corners may have many one-on-one situations.
I think what you just said.
Yeah,
honestly.
Yeah.
But let me rephrase. I wouldn't call it a weakness because it's not. There's no weakness in his defense from a scheme standpoint. What I would say is, just like with any defense, there are certain areas where you're going to struggle if you don't have top talent there. I think that Notre Dame could win with good players at linebacker. You can scheme your way into success with good front seven players and what Marcus Freeman does. You don't necessarily need elite players. You can scheme your way into it. However, if you're playing cover one, Vince, I don't care. There's no way to hide your corners. If they can't play, they're going to get beat. It's just as simple as that. You have to change your defense.
Yeah.
And Marcus Freeman's smart enough. If Marcus Freeman has good corners, or doesn't have good corners, he's not going to be playing cover one all day against Alabama. He's not an idiot.
Right. Exactly.
We've seen him make some adjustments at times. He's going to adjust his coverage. But if we're talking about what it is in its ideal form, you have to have guys at corner. You have to have top players at corner. And that's why they're recruiting so many dang corners, because they want guys who can just flat out line up and cover one-on-one.
Yep.
So I think the it's not a weakness, but the danger zone in his defense is that if they don't have top players on the back end, they can be susceptible. And we saw that in the Sugar Bowl, right? They had Ahmad Gardner at corner, but other than that, their corners were more group of six corners. They weren't Power 5 corners. And Georgia ran for 40 yards and only scored 24 points. They didn't score a ton of points, but what helped Georgia win that game is they had 5 or 6 big plays in the pass game, just throwing it over top of the defense. And that's where you're vulnerable, because you're cover one with not a lot of deep help. And if your corners aren't as good as the receivers you're going against, you're going to give up some big plays, which can negate a lot of the other success that you have. So that would be that's the trouble area if the talent is such. But schematically, philosophically, I don't see any weaknesses in his defense. And just like schematically, philosophically, I see weaknesses in the Brent Venables defense that are masked by the fact he always has elite players. But Alabama, there's no schematic or philosophical weaknesses in that defense. It's just personnel. And that's what I would say about Marcus Freeman's defense. There's no schematic or philosophical weaknesses. It's just, if you don't have the right personnel, you could get in trouble at times. We do have a super chat, Vince. I'm going to pull up real quick. Yep.
Did you just make a Top Gun reference, by the way? I was just wondering.
Huh?
Did you make a Top Gun reference? Is that what
I might have?
Heard?
Why?
Because you said it's the danger zone of his defense.
No.
That was intentional.
That was not. No, I was not harnessing Kenny Loggins or anything.
I'm just wondering. That's what I thought when you said it. So
nope. Patrick Barnes, another great podcast from two guys who actually understand the game. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. That's awesome,
much, Patrick.
That's great. That's awesome. We've got some conversation in here, Brian. I don't know if you want to touch on it. They're talking about who the quarterback is going to be at Clemson and Ohio State after the 22 season, et cetera. I don't know if that's something that you want to talk about.
Whoever starts a quarterback this year, I think is going to have a really good shot at starting in 2023 and 2022 and 2023. I'm not as high on Quinn Ewers as a lot of other people. I had him as my number 2 quarterback in this class, but I don't think he's the 5-star. I've seen people say he's the best quarterback of this generation, and I think that's just absurd.
Are you a DJ Uiagalelei fan?
I think he's very good, but I think in 2023 he won't be there.
Right, and that's actually
I think that's the conversation.
Said in there,
look, the number 1 quarterback in the country for me is Cade Klubnik going to Clemson. I think he'll be their next quarterback, and I love that kid. He's not like the top 5 NFL draft pick kind of guy, but I don't care about that. I'm projecting to college football.
Sure.
I think he's going to run that system incredibly well, and he's a very, very talented quarterback. But Ohio State, to me, is going to be interesting. Can C.J. Stroud win the starting job over Kyle McCord? If Kyle McCord beats him out, then I think Kyle McCord is going to be the starting quarterback for a few years. I like Kyle McCord a lot. He's a top 50 to 100 caliber player. I don't think Quinn Ewers is just going to be this walk on campus and be the guy. He's not Trevor Lawrence, no matter how much some of the recruiting services want to try to make him out to be to get clicks. He's not that guy. Cade Klubnik beat him in the state title game. But he is very good. He's very talented, I should say. So he'll have a shot to battle there too. But it's going to be, if you're someone who likes quarterback battles, those schools in the next couple of years, Ohio State now, Clemson after 2022 are going to have some battles. And Ty B with a super chat. Ty, appreciate that very, very much. Appreciate it. So let's keep rolling, Vince.
Yeah, let's keep on trucking. Let's see. A lot of talk about Clemson coming back down to earth maybe the next couple of years. What are your thoughts on that?
Come back down to earth. No, they're still going to be one of the best teams in the country, but I wrote about this in a recent midweek musing. I think Clemson is slowly coming down from what they were in 2018. I think 2018 was the zenith of that program. That Clemson team in 2018 was phenomenal. You had an elite defense. You had really good players on all three levels of the defense. You had a generational quarterback, an experienced veteran offensive line, elite players on the perimeter. You had elite young players in T. Higgins and Justin Ross. You had that veteran, savvy, knew how to get open guy in Hunter Renfrow. You had an elite running back in Travis Etienne. You had great coaching because remember, Jeff Scott was still there. And Jeff Scott and Tony Elliott were much better together than they have proven to be apart, both of them. And so that was a special team. A real special team. The 2019 team was a flawed team that, if not for Trevor Lawrence being the greatest quarterback of the last decade, they get beat by Ohio State in the play. I mean, they were down 60-0.
They were down, yeah.
Receivers were dropping balls. The O-line couldn't block anybody. The defense was giving up plays. Ohio State had some mistakes. Like I think there was a play where like they had J.K. Dobbins open for a touchdown on a wheel route. I think they missed him, or I forget, he might have dropped it or so. I can't remember. I just remember there being a big mistake. And then Trevor Lawrence just said, okay, I got this. You know what I mean? And he just went off and just made some great throws, made some big runs.
Unbelievable.
Put that team on his shoulders.
Individual effort. Yeah.
Right. And then we saw in the title game, he couldn't do that because he was going against a much better team in LSU. And then this past year, it was a very flawed Clemson team. They just had a great core. I mean, look, you look at that Clemson team against Notre Dame and BC in the regular season. That was a whole different Clemson team than we saw when Trevor Lawrence was a quarterback. Yeah. And then we saw again in the playoff where it was basically him and the defense struggled and the O-line struggled. And it was basically just Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne. And it just wasn't enough to beat a really good Ohio State team So, I think they're slowly coming back down to earth. Now, are they still a playoff caliber team every year?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
But are they that elite team that's going to win 2 out of 3 titles that they were? No, I don't think that they are.
Okay.
And with all due respect to DJ, I don't think he's Trevor, and I don't think he's Deshaun. I just don't. I could be wrong, but the difference between him and them is those guys could run.
Yeah,
and DJ's more of a pocket passer,
a statue.
And when you don't recruit and the reason I say that is it's not even about DJ, it's about the line. They don't recruit the line well. They've never had great lines. They've had good veteran lines, but as we saw with Notre Dame last year, they can get exposed against good pass rushers. We saw that in 2019 against Ohio State and LSU. And so I just feel like when you have a core, Trevor could overcome that. Like DJ's not going out against Ohio State in the semifinals and running for 100 yards. He's not doing what Deshaun did with his legs, right? Trevor and Deshaun could say, if the line's not helping me out, I can still make plays. If the line doesn't help DJ out, he's in trouble.
Yeah. Jojo Pineda jumping in says, hey guys, good afternoon. Quick question. Why hasn't there been younger players like wide receivers developed to get some early playing time?
I think big picture, Jojo, it's just a scheme that's far too complex for younger players to play.
Yep, I agree.
And I also think from a day-to-day coaching standpoint, when you have that kind of complex system, your focus needs to be on the scheme and not as much on the technique. And that's why we even see veteran players like Chase Claypool take big jumps from a fundamental standpoint as rookies in the NFL. After 4 years of college, you should not be making huge fundamental jumps in your first mini camp of the NFL. And that's what happened. So when you lose, that's why if you look at the best teams in the country, they are less scheme, more technique, more fundamentals, more how to play. And then the scheme eventually catches up to that part. Notre Dame's kind of the other way around when it comes to their offensive skill. And I think that's something that needs to change. And that's why I think it's been a little bit hard. And look, people point, what about Michael Mayer? Again, Michael Mayer's the anomaly, right? Michael Mayer's he's the anomaly. Okay. Chris Tyree, he's more of the anomaly.
Yeah.
He's not and again, Chris Tyree played in mop-up duty mostly. He wasn't a guy that was used as like a major factor in a lot of games.
And that was a problem, but
right. So it wasn't like Chris Tyree was out there getting 30 touches against Clemson. You know what I mean? Like, what did he have? Like 2?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's it against Clemson the first time they played. So, and then, I mean, if I'm going to pull this up because I think he had like 3 combined carries in his 2 games against Clemson. Yeah, 2 carries for -4 yards in the first game, 1 carry for 21 yards, which came in mop-up duty the second game. So it's not like Chris Tyree was out there playing a bunch. You know what I mean? So I think those things factor into it, in my opinion.
Matty K, 55. I can't wait to see Freeman's defense on the field. Do you guys think that we could see some occasional 4-4 package on D, or do you think Freeman has other special looks other than a 4-4?
I think if we could see a 4-4 in like goal line or short yardage or something like that. But I think the advent of quarters coverage has really made that 4-4 obsolete. 4-4, when I first started coaching in college, you'd see that at the D3 level. I mean, you really would. You'd see 4-4 teams. And then you saw the evolution of the 4-4 became two like sort of safety types. And then it just became quarters where you can go to a 4-2-5 or a 4-3, and those two safeties can play the alleys, and that's how you get that eighth box defender in there. So I think the advent of those type of schemes, Matty, has made the 4-4 obsolete outside of situational goal line-ish type of situations. So no, I don't think we'll see 4-4. I think we'll see 4-2-5. I think we'll see 3-3-5. I think we'll see 3-4 personnel. I don't think we'll see a 4-4 other than just those unique. Yeah, it's 3rd and 1 at the 7 type of. Sure. 4th and 1 at the 2, those type of situations.
And to the second part, do we think there'll be special looks other than the 4-4? Yeah, I think he's going to throw the house at people. I think that's going to be one of the things that's going to make this defense special.
I think Marcus is going to do what we talk about doing on offense. Coach Freeman's going to do on defense what I want people to do on offense, and that is less scheme, more looks, because it's easier for your players to digest. I know my call, I just got to know where I'm supposed to line up.
Right.
I think that makes it easier to digest.
Let's see here. Jacob Watson says, I think Tucker, Barnes, and G might find playing time. What do you say, Brian? And I will say, this is the teacher in me. This is where punctuation comes in. I was like, who's Tucker Barnes? I needed a comma, man.
Vince, come on, man. We're grown-ups here, right?
I stared at that for like 2 minutes. I'm like, who's Tucker Barnes? Yeah, so that's where I'm at today, everybody. But anyway, I'll let you go ahead and answer.
I think they all have a chance. I mean, as we talked about during the show, I definitely think Ryan Barnes does. I think Chance is going to have a shot, but again, he's got a little bit more to prove to me, and him not being an early. See, two of the guys you talked about, Jacob, weren't early enrollees, which is going to put him a little bit behind those other freshmen when it comes to playing. But if Chance Tucker and Kerry G are safety or special teams guys this year, would I be surprised? No. Would I be surprised if by the end of the year that Chance Tucker's earned a role as a rotation guy on defense? No. Would I be surprised if Kerry G did? No. It's going to be a battle, but I wouldn't be surprised by all of them. Would I predict that all three of those guys in that combination would play? Probably not, but I wouldn't necessarily like pound on the table and say, no, you're wrong. I'd say probably would maybe go with Phillip Reilly instead. But I really get nervous about saying Chance Tucker can't do something because, as I said, I just had this weird feeling his whole time as I'm ranking him as a 3.5-star kid and one of the lower kids. I have a feeling this kid's going to make me look stupid. I just really do. And I hope he does because
exactly.
I always like being wrong. I like being wrong when I don't think a kid can play. Right. It's like Maureen Walker and Steve Angeli. I don't think they're that good. Man, I hope both of them come out as seniors and just ball out. Right. And all the petty people are like, oh, what do you think now? I think they're better now than they were before. And I'm happy about that. I always like that.
David Carpenter says, any chance the, quote, tired of losing to the big three, quote, attitude causes Notre Dame to improve the punt kick returns, may put some of the freshmen on them to get game time?
I hope so. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the reason that you win those games solely. But, like if Notre Dame had a great punt return situation this year, I could definitely see kind of see something like that.
Eric 1863 says, not sure if you read/listen to Pete Sampson, listen to his pod with offensive coordinator Tommy Rees. He liked what he said about the offense and the new guys. Drew said Jaden T looks good. Have you heard the same thing?
Drew said Jade. Who the heck is Drew?
I don't know.
I have no idea. I haven't heard a lot about. I don't read or listen to Pete Sampson. I don't talk about Pete Sampson. I don't care what Pete Sampson say about anything. So no, I don't know what Pete Sampson said. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about Jaden T, and I don't know who Drew is. So I don't really have an answer for you. I think you're muted, Vince.
I am, and I'm still searching as well. Joseph talks about Jojo Johnson, and we're all high on Jojo Johnson. He says, Joseph Salvatore, do you think Jojo Johnson will have an impact this season? He looks jacked from the practice photos.
I mean, we talked about it earlier. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a whole lot to add beyond what I said earlier. Do I think he'll have a chance to play this year? Yes. Do I think he'll need a little bit more time to develop because of those kind of things? Yeah, I think he'll need a little bit more time.
We were talking about, nobody is cemented in at the quote will position, right? And Omar says, I had Simon as a breakout player, but I would call it the Apollo Sandman in a heartbeat if he doesn't equal last year's tackle total in the first 2 games.
I mean, at least the first 3. At least the first 3.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. We have enough trouble finding questions again. Is there too much commenting going on?
Oh, it's all good. Garrett Eno says, am I wrong to think that we are a quarterback away from a national championship, a play-making star quarterback?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's some other areas where this team isn't quite where it needs to be. 2018, for example, I've said if you trade quarterbacks, I think Notre Dame wins the title that year, but it still would have been they'd have had to compete. I don't think they would have beat Notre Dame or Clemson as convincingly as Clemson beat Notre Dame. We saw Notre Dame didn't have the depth in 2018 that other teams have. When Julian Love went down, there was a big drop off at that point in time. So I think the depth aspect of it is something that needs to continue improving. I think that they need to do the offensive philosophy, the offensive scheme has been somewhat limiting at times, and I think those are things that are also part of that need to improve. So I think a playmaking star quarterback certainly negates a lot of those things, but I think there's other areas where Notre Dame has to continue to improve. But I think overall they're very close. I don't think it's like you get a star quarterback and all of a sudden you're winning a title.
Yeah.
Do I think that gives you a better chance to win a title? Absolutely. And I think this notion that teams are winning just because of their star quarterbacks misses the fact that these teams that are winning titles are very good teams everywhere. That's why Kyler Murray didn't win a national championship, right? That's why Baker Mayfield didn't win a national championship. That's why Josh Allen at Wyoming didn't win a national. You know what I mean? Like, there's been a lot of great quarterbacks that didn't win national titles because it's also about what's around you. You have to be good everywhere. Ohio State didn't win a title with Justin Fields because Ohio State has flaws as a program. There's parts of their team that just aren't as good as others, whereas Clemson had fewer flaws. I don't know if Clemson had a flaw in that 2018 team other than just inexperience. That Alabama team last year, it's like our nitpicking was like, yeah, their defense gave up 19 points a game. That's not great. Well, there's a lot of teams that would love to only give up 19 points a game. If Oklahoma only gave up 19 points a game, they'd have like 4 national titles right now in the Bob Stoops, Lincoln Riley era. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's still about the team. But yes, is a very good quarterback a key ingredient to that? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Ty B says, I'm excited to see if Tyler Buchner plays a role this year. I am too. But if he reaches full potential in the years to come, Brian, how good do you think he could be?
Man, I hate answering these questions just because I feel like I'm putting so much hype on the kid. But honestly, Tyler Buchner reminds me a lot of I kind of got like Ty B's asking me about Tyler Buchner. Is this a setup? Is Tyler Buchner bored today and he's trying to see if I want to say something bad about him?
The Ty B. That's great.
I'm just joking. I think he's Deshaun. I think he's very similar to Deshaun Watson. I do. I mean, especially the 2015 version of Deshaun, which was a little less turnover prone and was more of a runner. I mean, Deshaun Watson in 2015 was just a phenomenal quarterback. I mean, just the numbers he put up that year were just silly. I mean, you're talking about a kid that passed for 4,100 yards, 35 touchdowns, rushed for 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns. Could I see Tyler Buchner putting up similar numbers, 35 plus 100 passing yards, 30 touchdowns? Because again, 4,100 passing yards for Deshaun Watson came in 15 games. Tyler Buchner in that same time would be 14 games, because they don't have a title game. 3,600 yards plus 1,000 rushing yards. Yeah, I could see Tyler Buchner doing that. I think style of play wise and potential wise, he has that. Now Deshaun came in far more experienced than Tyler, which is still my big concern. But yeah, I think Tyler Buchner can be that kind of quarterback if he reaches his peak. Now, again, reaches his full potential was the question. To me, Deshaun Watson was close to his full potential as a sophomore. I think Tyler's going to need a little bit more time to reach his full potential because of that experience aspect of it.
All right, Brian, I got bumped and it's past where we were taking screenshots. But there was a question I would imagine based on some of these answers about what is next for Brian Kelly as far as could he be the president at Notre Dame? Could he be the athletic director at Notre Dame? And based on some of these answers, somebody said you got to be a priest to be, Father Jenkins' job, et cetera, which is true. They're not going to have anybody except a priest be in that job. But for athletic director, I'm curious as to your thoughts on Brian Kelly potentially maybe moving into the big chair if Jack Swarbrick has only a couple of years left.
I'm not a big fan of that.
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of moving a head coach into that because there's always going to be sort of that former coach looking over your shoulder feel. Plus, look, being a good athletic director is a lot of work. I mean, it is not a job like you do when you retire.
Especially at a place like Notre Dame.
Exactly. I mean, think about all the money Jack Swarbrick's had to raise, all the swinging of his big stick, as far as the program and the weight it carries to keep the super conferences from happening. Jack Swarbrick was the primary reason we don't have super conferences right now.
And Jack Swarbrick is on all these committees, just like a conference commissioner would be, where that's their only job. Jack Swarbrick still has to be the athletic director at Notre Dame with all the sports, right? So, I mean, it's almost like he has added stuff on his plate that normal athletic directors just don't have.
Exactly. And so I think when Brian Kelly leaves coaching, he's going to go do some fun stuff. He's going to do speaking. He's going to be on ESPN or Fox or, I can see Brian Kelly doing some of the stuff that Urban Meyer's done at Fox the last couple. I think Brian Kelly would be really good at that. He can kind of get on he could get on the telestrator and kind of talk through Oklahoma's this. And because Urban would do these like little 4 or 5 minute segments with Brady Quinn and Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush. And you're like, man, you felt like you learned something in 5 minutes. I can see Brian Kelly doing stuff like that.
Yep.
He's got a pretty engaging personality in those kind of situations. So I think he'd be better at doing stuff like that than getting into an administrative role. Cause that's a lot of work. I mean, it's not, cause I think, when you coach, man, when you're done coaching at 60, you're like a 60-year-old that's like 80 in a normal life. Because it's such an exhausting profession.
It's like the president.
When presidents retire, they retire. I mean, they're done. Right. They go run Fortune 500 companies. They just kind of step back and they're just like, okay. I feel like that's kind of how it is a guy like Notre Dame, Brian Kelly. I think it's okay. Let me just go live my life. Let me. His kids are getting to the age now where I think his daughter's like getting a little older in her Notre Dame years. His son is a freshman in college. By the time he leaves Notre Dame, they're going to be out of college. They're going to probably be, starting families and stuff like, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's grandpa time at that point in time. Yeah. It's speaking engagement time. It's being on, having a weekly role on a Fox, sports channel or ESPN. Right. I think that's more of what we'll see. And I think he'll be good at that. I think he'd be really good at that.
I do too. He's very personable.
AD thing. Yeah. No. That's, and I don't know if there'd be a lot of people at Notre Dame that'd be real happy about that either.
Sure.
I think there's already enough. Football gets all the cool stuff. Then you make the former head football coach your AD.
Yeah, exactly. Brent says, looking at the 23 scholarship chart, it looks like the corner safety could be our strongest spot, or at least on par with the best. Crazy. They've killed DB recruiting the last couple cycles. I know you love 23 recruiting. That's why.
It's just like they're already
looking past 22.
We're 21 and 22.
Don't worry about it.
Scholarship chart 2023.
Don't worry about it.
Brent, I love it, man. But honestly, I have not looked at the scholarship chart in 2023 yet. But I do think it could be a strength. I think defensive line could be a strength. But after the way that Notre Dame has recruited linebacker in this class and who's on this, Sonny Styles and Drake Bowen and Takis Curtis and guys that are on the radar for next year, plus Prince Colley, the secondary is going to have to be pretty flipping good to be better than what they're doing at linebacker right now. As we're looking forward to the 2023 season.
Martin Demo saying, speaking of special teams, how's our kicker progressing? We started getting a bit sloppy in field goals after the first Clemson game last year. Keep doing God's work. Go Irish. I will say that Jonathan Dorr has one of the strongest legs I've ever seen in a kicker. It's just his accuracy is sometimes a miss. And
I wouldn't say his accuracy. I think his
and that was just you
issue.
Took the words right out of my mouth because what game? I can't remember which game it was. I think it was the ACC championship game, or it was the Final Four game. I can't remember which one it was, but he missed a kick and went to the sideline, and the first person he was talking to was the sports psychologist. Like, she made the trip to the game basically to be there for Jonathan Dorr, it felt like. And that worried me a little bit. And I know that sometimes kickers can get inside their own heads, and it's kind of like messing with a pitcher who has a perfect game going, or, those kinds of things. But that gave me pause that the first thing he did was go talk to the sports psychologist after he missed a field goal. Like, that worried me. Now, that was a year ago, right? And hopefully, he's grown up, he's got more mature, things have progressed. But again, we haven't seen kickers specifically, and so I can't really speak to his progression as to, how he's doing in the summer or, anything of that nature. But I can tell you right now that Jonathan Dorr and Jay Bramlett are going to be the kicker and the punter. I mean, they are. So
Jay Bramlett's really good.
Yeah.
He's very underrated.
He's excellent.
Regarding kicker, excellent. What he said. That's a great answer.
Thank you.
I'm just as shocked as you are.
I know.
I'm totally kidding. Not shocked you had a range, but shocked that I have nothing else to add.
No, that's good stuff.
Speechless. Good stuff. Nailed
it. Jeff Fluke says in the Freeman interview, he stated a player went on a visit elsewhere and called him and told him he was committing to that school. Freeman was able to convince him to think about it. He is now all ND. Morrison, ? Like, I know you're not going to answer that last part, but I will say that was a great story. It was an absolutely great story, and it was a great story for a lot of reasons. One, that he stayed with that kid even though he called and said he was going to commit elsewhere, and two, that he's like, oh, dude, just take a chill, like, relax, take a second, think about it. And
that doesn't work.
Yeah.
If you then tried to convince that kid to commit during his visit with you. So when everybody gets, kids are going elsewhere and you're not getting these kids. Okay, well, you weren't going to get those kids eventually anyway.
Right.
But if you try to convince a kid, whoever it is, to commit during his visit, and then you try to convince them to not commit during another visit, it ain't going to work. Mm-hmm. It's a consistent philosophy that say, hey, look, we asked you to be, we told you to be patient when you wanted to commit to us. All I'm asking is you do the same thing with this school. Give us a couple days to just talk to you, and we'll go from there. So that's another reason why that philosophy that Notre Dame employs is really, really smart, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Jonathan Kazmierak. Yahoo Sports had a bowl projection, the Cheez-It Bowl with Notre Dame and Texas. I know those projections are way too early and relatively meaningless, but they're basically saying Notre Dame will go 9-3. Go.
I got to step in here, Vince.
Go.
Okay.
Go, yeah.
If Notre Dame goes 9-3, I would be so thrilled if the Cheez-It Bowl was the consolation prize because I love Cheez-Its. I just have this vision of like walking into my hotel and there's just boxes of Cheez-Its on the bed
everywhere.
Like you're because we get like these we get these cool things like the backpack I use to games is one I got from the Cotton Bowl. I got iPods one year. I got this sound system that one year. Like, they give cool stuff to the media. I would just like a big box of freaking Cheez-Its.
They didn't give anything to the game I went to
cover that game. I don't care where the Cheez-It Bowl. If it was in British Columbia, I would cover the Cheez-It Bowl. There's no question about it. Do I see Notre Dame being 9-3? It's possible. I would be surprised. It'd be a disappointing season, but it's possible. I just, it's a lot of hype for Texas A&M or Texas, because don't you have to be like the third team in the Big 12 to get to the Cheez-It Bowl? I think it's the number 3 team in the Big 12.
So what is that saying about Texas?
I think they're going to be pretty decent this year with Sarkisian.
Okay.
That's what they're saying.
Okay. A lot of people saying that they would be bummed with 9 wins or 3 losses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like I said, I think that'd be a disappointing season.
Barring
just like you just had the most catastrophic rash of injuries in the history of mankind.
Yeah, there's a lot of so as soon as Jonathan put that in there, now we've got a ton of predictions for what the Notre Dame's record is going to be. Let's see. How about this one? He says, you always hate to lose a verbal commitment, but in the overall scheme, how much does losing Agu hurt the program? You mentioned in another podcast that part of the reason he might have left was competition, I believe is probably what he was going to say at the end.
Chris, I don't know if you want me to answer this question because somebody told me that you were in another chat recently saying that unfortunately your opinion was formed by something I said. So I'm not sure if you really want me to answer this question, I say sarcastically. But look, it just depends on who they get to replace them. If they don't get anybody to replace them, sorry, work on the deck. If they don't get someone to replace him, it's a loss.
Yeah.
Because he's a really talented player. If they get Hero Canoe to replace him because they didn't have room for Hero Canoe before, then I'm good with that. It's a little bit more balance, another interior guy as opposed to a third end. If they get Anthony Lucas and Hero Canoe, and it's going to be like Darren who? I mean, be disrespectful, but I mean that's just kind of the point. I mean that would end up being better than what you would have been with him. I mean, which is saying something because I really like Darren Agu. This is not you liked him when he committed Notre Dame. Now he's all of a sudden not a good player. No, I had him a 4-star, top 200 player with 5-star upside, and I believe that today. That's a huge pickup for Vanderbilt. But I do think if they get Canoe and Anthony Lucas or Cyrus Moss and Hero Canoe, which is going to be hard but doable, then they'll end up being better than they would have been with him.
You mentioned that Bob Diaco was making some crazy comments, and you never knew what he was going to say. Michael Scheller jumps in. He says, didn't Diaco make a Freddie Krueger-like comment in referencing the defense too? He did make some very strange / weird analogies.
Like he'd say things like me and Tim O'Malley kind of look at each other like Tim O'Malley and I'm like, did he just say what we think? It's just like, okay, that guy's just that's a weird guy. He just said some of the weirdest stuff. It's like, and the thing is, the weird stuff he says is like not even remotely answering the question that was asked. Like,
yeah,
I don't know what you said, and I don't know why you said it, because my question was simply about, is so-and-so going to be healthy for Saturday? You know what I mean? So, like, I don't know what you're talking about, dude. You're freaking me out a little bit.
Chris Ayers said, continuation on what teams on their schedule, if the defense is solid, what teams will score more than 33 points? And I realize this was an answer to another comment, but I was interested to get kind of your thoughts on who you think is going to score potentially more than 33 points against Notre Dame.
I don't think anybody. I mean, I don't project anybody to.
That would be
doesn't
really
mean it won't happen, but I mean, look, as great as that, I just said the 2018 Clemson team was generational and scored 31 points or 30 points. This Alabama team that averaged almost 50 this year scored 31, right? So, I mean, yeah, you may have a game like a Michigan that happens. It's just a freaky game, and they put some points on the board late against your backups, but I wouldn't project anyone to score more than 33 points on Notre Dame. That'd be a little surprising, unless it was like a double overtime game, like Clemson this year. That's right. Different. You know what I mean? Like, but
in my opinion, that's different. Yeah. Brian Denbo says maybe the Zorich interview was an olive branch from Kelly, hoping Freeman would say what he said. Look, Brian Kelly is a very smart dude. I would be surprised if he allowed this interview thinking that Marcus Freeman was going to say some of the things that he said. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't feel like he planned it out like that perfectly. Now, he's a type A personality. He likes to plan stuff. I get it. I just have a hard time thinking that he's like, okay, now if I let him do this podcast, he's going to say this, this, and this. It's going to make me look great. Like, I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that. That's all.
I agree. I think Brian Kelly likes to control the narrative, but that's taking it a little bit too far.
Right, exactly. He does like to control the narrative. You're not wrong about that.
Not to that degree, in my opinion. Not to that degree. But again, this is why you should let your coaches talk, because if you hire the right people, they're going to make you look good.
And that's what their job is, right? I mean,
and Marcus Freeman made Brian Kelly. Some people may not look at it that way, but I think that's absolutely made Brian Kelly look great. And I think it was truthful. It was giving us a glimpse into a version of Brian Kelly we don't get to see. And that's unfortunate.
Yes. Right.
Because I don't want to see Brian Kelly in his tie and hair perfectly groomed and saying all the right things all the time. I want to see this. I want to see that Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
Right?
Me too.
I want to see Brian Kelly act as mad at Alabama and Clemson as he does at us when he doesn't like our questions.
Yeah.
Like I would like to see that version of Brian Kelly. I really do. I don't get mad when he gets upset about questions that we ask, as long as it's like not getting mad because we're asking If we're asking you about closing the gap on Alabama, don't get mad about that. If we ask you some dumb question about, and trust me, Brian Kelly gets asked some pretty dumb questions.
That's true. That's true.
So, I get it. It's like he ripped me one time in 2011. It was at Wake Forest, and he just crushed me after an interview.
10 years ago?
Yes, because I asked him about pass game inefficiency in the first half. Because remember, they were barely winning that game, and they struggled. I was setting him up for another question about how well they played in the second half. And that was a lesson that I learned is, number one is, again, it was my second year coming to the team. It wasn't a great question asker. I just talked football, But the mistake I made wasn't necessarily that. It was not reading the room. He had been answered like 4 really stupid questions in a row from people. It wasn't the Notre Dame beat. It wasn't like from us. It wasn't like It was just like some, and you could just see the emotion building. And then when I asked my question, it was just like, you do know we won the game, right? And he just ripped me. And looking back, and I was like, what the heck? Like, because I was a pretty pro Brian Kelly guy at the time. So I was like, what in the world was that about? Like, I didn't follow up with a question, and I remember when the SID came up to me. I was like, Coach Kelly's is really upset right now. I was like, I don't care, he's freaking upset. Like, that's not my job to make him happy. My job is to ask questions.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, I was like, if knowing then what I know now, I would have led with the positive one first.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, you guys really tore it up in the second half. What were some of the adjustments you made at halftime to really get going? I would have asked it completely differently. That was on my inexperience, right?
But you still would have gotten the answer that you were looking for.
I would have got the answer I was looking for. Yeah, because then he would have talked about what they were doing in the first half and then the adjustments. Because I was trying to set him up for a big question where I've learned just ask the big question. Don't set him up for it. Just ask you guys did a great, give him some, second half, Tommy Reese went such and such and such and such. And, what was the adjustments you guys made after the, first half that really worked for you? More of like because I wanted a positive answer, but I asked a negative question. But again, he didn't rip me, in my opinion, for my question. It was my question was the thing. Like, do you ever watch that show? Was it the Emojis movie?
Oh yeah,
or I forget. Maybe it's not the Emojis one, but there's that one that the guy just explodes and his head just like catches fire. Is that the Emoji movie or is that Inside Out?
No, it's Inside Out.
Okay,
it's Inside Out.
That was Brian Kelly.
He
was getting to that point where the anger sharks are swimming in my head again. You know what I mean? Because the questions were just just so bad. And then I come with a negative question, and it was like they just won a game. You know what I mean? And it's like. So that was on me, but so he gets asked a lot of bad questions, but I want to see a Brian Kelly with a little bit, letting his hair down a little bit, and say, look, I'm sick of losing these games and we're going to do what we got to do. I think that would endear him to Notre Dame fans. Like, hey, you feel as bad about this loss as they do. I think that's something that turns a lot of Notre Dame fans off of him is he as upset about it as I am? Like you could just see in Lou Holtz's face after they lost that he just wanted to go cry. He just was disgusted, just broken when he would lose. And I think Brian Kelly is a real professional guy that he doesn't want to let people see. I think he is crushed when he loses games. Yeah. I just think he's kind of got that politician in that he doesn't want to let you see that vulnerability. I think sometimes, again, I don't want Brian Kelly all in his feelings all the time, right? I don't want him walking in crying, but let us see that.
That's different. It's
fans see that you are losing those games because they are. Let them see that you do you do aspire to championships, and you don't just give it lip service. And I think what Marcus Freeman said that Brian Kelly said is something that I think a lot of fans want to hear from him, and that's partly why people reacted to that interview the way that they did.
Yeah, I want to see the Brian Kelly that's like sitting around the fire at the lake house with a beverage in his hand. That's the kind of emotion, like the raw, like let your guard down a little bit.
And I'm not advocating that Brian Kelly brings a beer to the press conference, but no,
I'm not saying at the press. I'm saying it as lake house. But yes,
you're just trying to advocate for an invitation to lake house. It ain't happening, Vince.
It's worth a shot.
Yeah.
It's worth a shot. I'm good at lake house. No. All right, Chris Ayers. He goes, does Wisconsin on paper have a more talented roster? I understand scheme-wise they might be able to overpower Notre Dame, but I think what Notre Dame has in their favor is it's a neutral site early in the season, and ND being expected to be a solid to great defense, especially with a team that over the years has been rather one-dimensional. You're shaking your head.
No, Wisconsin, not even close.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're being honest, talent-wise, look, so these preseason All-American rankings are not end-all be-alls, right? But just to make a point, there was a recent one from Pro Football Network, and this has been kind of a common theme. They had 5 Notre Dame players on the first, second, or third team All-Americans. Notre Dame's 12 opponents combined had 7. There was nobody with more than 2. There's not a more talented team on their roster, not one. You can ask about anybody on the roster, and the answer will be no. That's not the question. The question is, are there teams that are close enough to where if Notre Dame brings their B game, can beat Notre Dame? The answer to that is yes. Is Wisconsin good enough? Is the gap narrow enough to where if Notre Dame comes out and turns it over 3 times and isn't playing disciplined football, can Wisconsin beat them? Absolutely. But if Notre Dame plays at least their B-plus game, they have a shot to beat everybody on their schedule. And if they play their A game, there's not a team on their schedule that could also play their A game and beat Notre Dame. There just isn't. Now, the thing I love about football is nobody brings their A game every week. Nobody. Not Clemson, not Alabama, not Oklahoma, right, not Georgia, not Ohio State. Nobody. It's just whether or not your not A game comes when you're playing Vanderbilt, or does it come when you're playing LSU? Because that's going to determine whether you win those games or not. Notre Dame brought its F game against Louisville last year and still won. If they'd have played like that against Pitt or Clemson or North Carolina or BC, they'd have caught an L, right? So that's the other part is, when do you not have that good game? That's the question.
Michael Campbell with a comment. He says, Notre Dame needs playmaker talent on offense to win big, and Tommy Rees needs some more creativity and aggressive passing, executing to score touchdowns in high-profile games. The defense held Alabama to 31. So many things about that comment. Number one, yes, the defense held Alabama to 31. They took their foot off the gas. That's just a fact. So they could have scored more than that if they wanted to. But I don't think that is necessarily has anything to do with the defense, per se. They were on the field a lot, etc. But Alabama took their foot off the gas. I'll say that. Notre Dame has playmakers on offense, I believe. And I also believe that Tommy Rees is going to be more creative and aggressive in the passing game, and touchdowns will be scored. So that's my comment to this comment, to Michael's comment. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No. I'm good.
Okay. Fair enough. Jermaine Berkeley has an interesting one. I think we're jumping the gun on Marcus Freeman. What are the chances that we're overrating his ability to coach? What's his overall record?
I don't think we're overrating him at all. I mean, I think you look at what he's built at Cincinnati the last 2 years, and it's an excellent product. I mean, that's really we're at the point now where they're now working over me, so we're gonna have to. This is gonna be my last question, Vince. Hopefully, you can kind of answer the final questions. But for me, it's you look at what he's done at Cincinnati the last couple of years, and they've been a top defense the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. You look at
Cincinnati.
At Cincinnati, and what that means is it's Cincinnati, so they're not playing a lot of Power 5 teams, but they're not getting a lot of Power 5 talent either. Last year, they ranked 8th in the country in scoring defense. They ranked 13th in the country in total defense, and they ranked 4th in the country in yards allowed per play in a league known for really good offenses, right? And so I think the job he's done but wins and losses, he can only control one part of the game. So you can have a great defense and be 6-6, but I think the job he's done as a coach, I mean, and not just the success, so the points are the stats are one part of it, Jermaine, right? That's part of the equation. But then the other part for me as a coach is watching how they play. And I remember when John Tenuta got hired, and I said, this is going to be a bad hire. People said, well, he's had a top 25 defense for X number of years in a row. So, yeah, but look at the numbers. They'd give up like 40 and 500 yards to Clemson or West Virginia one week, and then the next week they're playing like Duke, back when Duke was awful, or they play Samford, not Stanford, Samford, and hold those teams like 110 yards, and then you add those two games together, and they're a top 25 defense. When in reality, they were not a top 25 defense because his defense had flaws. Right. When I watch Marcus Freeman's defense, schematically, there's not a lot of holes there. You have to outplay them to beat them. And then you watch how his players play the game, and you can tell not only is he a smart X's and O's guy, but him and his coaches, they teach kids how to play the game. on top of being a motivator and all those other type of things, a good recruiter, it's the total package of what he's proven at Cincinnati. Now, part of the reason I've said, hey, let's let him coach a game first before we anoint him as the next head coach of Notre Dame. I get that. But based on what I've seen from him, I'm encouraged and excited about what he's going to bring to the table.
All right, Brian, if you have to jet, I will take it from here. I understand if you do. So,
and there's a super chat here. I'm going to pull that up, Vince, from Old Grim.
Awesome.
Appreciate that very, very much, Old Grim. If the offense steps up at all, I see no one beating Notre Dame, and I tend to agree with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Old Grim. Appreciate the super chat there at the end, or close to the end. So Brian, we will see you later, sir. And I will try to take us home here. Chris has a question. He says, if ND is in a playoff game against one of the top three or Oklahoma, do you think that Buckner with early gameplay possibly gives you that advantage to at least compete? First of all, it's bigger than Tyler Buckner. So it's not an issue where it's going to be, if Tyler Buckner's the quarterback, then Notre Dame is going to compete for a championship. I don't believe that at all. I think it's more the offense as a whole competing for a championship. And if they are getting to a championship this year, and they have Jack Cohn at quarterback, for example, but the offense has stepped up to a point where they're scoring at a pace where you're pushing 40 points a game, etc. I'm fine with Jack Cohn being the quarterback. Look, he's going to be the guy that is going to get the ball into the hands of playmakers. Like that's the whole reason that we're confident as to who Jack Cohn is and what he can do in this offense. I think Tyler Buckner can be a great quarterback someday, and maybe we'll see flashes of it this year if he gets into the game and there's a package for him, etc. I'm not ready to hand over the keys just yet. And now maybe my opinion will change by December after I've seen him play, if he plays or if Jack Cohn gets hurt or Drew Pine or whatever the case may be. But I think to use one of Brian's expressions, man, we got to pump the brakes a little bit just because, look, Tyler Buckner has played 1 year of high school, right? And, he had a prolific junior year, put up video game numbers in California. It's no question, right? But then, he was hurt a sophomore year. He didn't get a senior year. So he hasn't played a lot of football. So I think eventually he will end up being very, very good. I just don't know if it'll be this year. So I think we just have to kind of wait and see how that turns out. Maybe he ends up being really good this year, and maybe I'm completely changing my tune. But as of right now, no, I don't think it's going to be as simple as it depends on what quarterback you have where they're going to be able to compete. So I have a hard time getting on that train of thought, to be perfectly honest with you. Ty B says, best show ever. Love you guys. Go Irish. Thank you, Ty. I appreciate that. Thanks for looking out. Thanks for being in the chat. Michael Campbell, what are 5 new changes or additions on offense from Tommy Rees to give me confidence we could score touchdowns against top 5 schools enough to win? I don't know if I'm going to be able to come up with 5 per se, but it's more about a philosophy change than anything else. I think that you're going to see more of an emphasis on RPOs. I think you're going to see more of an emphasis on getting the ball into the hands of the playmakers. I mean, he's flat out said, I'm going to get the ball in the hands of Chris Tyree. I'm going to get the ball in the hands of Xavier Watts, right? We saw last year that almost their entire offense was geared around getting the ball in the hands of Braden Lindsey and Kevin Austin, and then they both got hurt. So I do believe that he is going to get the ball in the hands of the playmakers, and I think that he's smart enough to, work around the fact that the offensive line is who they are, and it could be some tough sledding at first, depending on what that offensive line ends up looking like on September 5th when they travel down to Tallahassee, right? So I think you're going to see a lot of quick throws. I think you're going to see, they're going to attempt to stretch the field. I think Jack Cohn will stretch the field. I think that, Jack Cohn's willing to stand in the pocket, go through his reads, get the ball to the open guy. I think you're going to see him spread the ball out an awful lot. And so I think you're going to see that emphasis in the play calling. But I just think his whole philosophy is going to change a little bit. They're not going to have necessarily those, power forward wide receivers that they force the ball to, right? They could do that before because they had those guys and they had a really good offensive line, so they could run the ball a lot more. Now, I'm not saying they're going to abandon the run because they're not going to abandon the run. This is still Notre Dame, and Kyron Williams is still a really good running back, and Chris Tyree is a really good running back, and Sebo Flemister is going to give you good minutes at running back. What I am saying is I think that the passing game will complement the run game. It'll be an extension of the run game, getting the ball out for screens, finding Tyree and Williams in the pass game, things of that nature. I think just basically spreading the ball around and RPOs are the two biggest things that you're going to be able to keep your eye on offensively to where this offense, and I think Tommy Rees specifically, is really going to put his fingerprint on what this offense can be. Let's see, kind of going down to the bottom here. Now I can see why, I can definitely see where Brian doesn't like to be in here by himself because trying to find some questions and answer them all at the same time is not enough it's very difficult. 2007 Domer wants to know, it says, Brian, over under 1.5 shows tomorrow. I don't want to speak for Brian, but I don't know what time the announcement is going to be. So I'll have to ask Brian. So I don't necessarily want to answer because I'm not sure when the announcement's going to be. It could be during this show. And so then that would be under. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But we will hopefully have some more information on that in tomorrow's show when we are breaking down Toledo and Purdue, because that is the plan for tomorrow's show. Tommy Lawson says, I get 5 stars to Brian. How can you multitask using 2 computers and talk at the same time? Vince, you're good too. Thank you. Yeah, it's not the easiest thing in the world. And I'm just on a laptop, so I don't have the cool setup that Brian has. So I'm just not. I'm not as cool. I don't have the technology. I'm not as good as he is. Michael Campbell says, I'm still having Tyler Buchner in the Wisconsin game. Look, we've said it before. I hope Tyler Buchner has a package. I hope that he is in every game at some point. Whether that's what they did with Ian Book in 2018 when he was kind of the red zone guy, which I thought was really strange with the 2 quarterbacks that they had, that you chose Ian Book as the red zone guy, but they knew they wanted to get him on the field and they knew they wanted to have a package for him. And so that's what they did. And it made sense at the time. And so I get it. I'm hoping that they do something similar with Tyler Buchner because I do believe that he can, be very beneficial in something along those lines. So I hope that we do see him in all the games, not just the Wisconsin game. Now, I am not going to predict that Tyler Buchner is going to be the starter at the Wisconsin game. But, hey, if that's what you're predicting, Michael, then you are more than welcome to do that. Many of my predictions, I'm sure, have fallen on their face. That's why I don't keep track of whether my predictions are true or not. Tracy Tipton says, great show as always. Is Morrison coming to Notre Dame tonight? He is making his announcement tomorrow. So he's definitely not coming tonight. It is a possibility that he is coming tomorrow. So you'll have to, again, we'll have an announcement as to if we're going to do another show or what time that would be if we do tomorrow. So I'll let Brian go ahead and announce that when we have our show. But he is announcing tomorrow. I'm just not 100% sure what time that is. Omar, Tucker Barnes isn't as good as Pine Cone. That's a good one. I appreciate that one. Thank you, Tommy. Tommy Gunn says, I'm with you. Punctuation is very necessary. Again, it's just the teacher side of me coming out. I've graded way too many papers without proper punctuation, and it makes my life very, very difficult. I could say that it makes my students' life very difficult because I mark down for that kind of stuff. So, yeah, a lot of Cheez-It comments, which is great. Because I'm a huge fan of Cheez-Its as well. So Michael Campbell says the SEC analysts and YouTubers in the South are promoting a 4-loss Notre Dame season. Basically, we will lose to everyone who is in the top 25 that are competition. There's, and then Brent says, of course they are. Yeah, that's kind of my response to that as well. Of course they are. There's nothing that is better for clicks and ratings and all that than to be a Notre Dame hater. And when you realistically look at the coaching staff for Notre Dame defensively, what Brian Kelly has done, over the last 6 months or so, what Notre Dame has coming back, what they have in the pipeline that could be starting and playing significant minutes. And then you look at what the other teams are doing and what they are and who they are. I'm sorry. I cannot say that Notre Dame is going to have 4 losses. I don't see it. And look, Notre Dame is favored in every single game except one, and that's the Wisconsin game. And the last time I checked, it was a 1.5 point spread. That's basically a pick'em game. So even Vegas is saying that Notre Dame is going to win all their games except maybe one, right? And I think an 11-1 Notre Dame team is a very realistic thing. I think a 10-2 team, I can't necessarily pick out the game that would be where Notre Dame's 10-2, but that's way more realistic to me than 8-4. Again, I could be wrong. There's no question that I could be wrong. But I just have a really hard time seeing 4 losses for this Notre Dame team in the regular season. I really, really do. So, we'll see. Only time will tell. And luckily we are, a month and a half away from game 1. So, we'll see. We shall see. I just don't see it. Shannon Heidick says, the show is rubbing off when in the last 2 weeks I've had 3 separate non-Notre Dame conversations with my wife, daughter, and coworker, and I told them to let it play out, which is fantastic, Shannon. Thank you for that. I know Brian will love to hear that. I'm sure if he's listening, he will be chuckling about that. That is hilarious. I love that. Absolutely love that. And I have done the same thing. And I was actually, as I'm searching here for another comment or question, I was talking to my assistant baseball coach the other day, and I was like, yeah, you know what? This kid could be a gap closer for us. And I was like, wow, it's just in my vernacular now. So, the show rubs off both ways, let me tell you. And I guess it's Brian that rubs off on all of us. So, it could definitely be a worse thing. Matt D says, I agree on Buckner. We need to let him have time to progress. The junior year was against lesser talent. He tried to get better competition by transferring schools for his senior year, but COVID. Yeah, that's exactly right, Matt. And look, he did try to get better competition, and I give him all the credit in the world for that. It's tough just from a student standpoint, just from a human being standpoint to transfer for just your senior year. Like that's not an easy thing to do. And Tyler Buckner was like, look, I need to get more competition. This is what I'm going to do. And then, of course, a worldwide pandemic hit, and he missed out on his senior year. And then I think he made the right decision by coming to Notre Dame early as opposed to playing his senior year because he got a leg up and, got into the playbook and was able to practice with his teammates and all of that. So I think he made the right decision coming to Notre Dame early. But again, he hasn't played competitive football since his junior year of high school. So even if he's the second coming of quarterbacks, you've got to give him an opportunity to compete and all of that. It'll be 2 years since he played in a competitive game when the season starts, right? So I think you have to give him some time. You have to let him develop. Could he take over maybe in the middle of the season? Anything is possible. I just don't see him being the starter. And if he is the starter at the beginning of the season when Notre Dame goes to Florida State, then he's really, really good. And he's way ahead of schedule. And that means he's better than Jack Cohn. Excuse me. That means he's better than Drew Pine. And that's a really good problem to have. So if he gets to that point, then great. I don't see that happening right away. That doesn't mean I don't think that Buckner's going to be a great player, because I do think Buckner's going to be a great player. It's just a matter of you have to let it play out a little bit. So, we'll see what happens. Again, Matt D says, make sure you hit the subscribe, share, hit the notification bell so you never miss a live show. Make sure you get your subscription to the IB message board. Yeah, take a look at the, let's see what's right here. Woo, the scrolling link there, boards.irishbreakdown.com. That is our brand new message boards that Brian and his wife put together, Ange, and it is awesome. I highly recommend it. It is. If you've already signed up for, through SI, then you automatically get access to the message board. So make sure you let Brian know. It's Brian at irishbreakdown.com, Brian with a Y. Make sure you let him know that you want to get in on that. Or you can just register for the message board all by itself. You just go to that link and that should all be there for you. So there you go. OC Irish fan is saying Morrison is going to announce at 2 p.m. Eastern. Well, I know where I'm at 2 p.m. Eastern every day, and that is in this show. So I'm going to go ahead and take the under at 1.5 shows because we might just talk about it during the show. So we will see what happens. So and then Kenny Moore also had the same information. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate that. Helping me plan my day, and I appreciate that as well. Let's see, getting down to the end here, which is good. Oh, I got to throw this up, right? D-Rock says, nice job, Vince. The live chat meter did not change much when you started going solo in the show. Well done. I was nervous about it. I'll be honest. I am not a solo talk guy. I did a radio show this morning from 6 to 9 a.m., and I'll be doing that the rest of the week. So I apologize if I'm a little tired, but I was real nervous about doing a solo show, and luckily I had a partner in crime there as well. I'm the back and forth guy. So, I like to have somebody to bounce my talking off with. I'm the conversation at the bar stool, on the bar stool kind of guy. So I appreciate that, D-Rock, you the man. So that's it. That's going to do it. We are at the bottom of the comments. If we missed a comment or two, I apologize. Make sure you jump in tomorrow. So tomorrow at 1:00, Brian and I are going to preview the Toledo and Purdue games. So we're going to do a 2-for-1. So make sure you tune in there. We will, of course, have our question and answer period afterwards. Make sure you, again, if you're listening to us on the podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're watching us on the YouTube channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, hit a like, and make sure that, enjoy what we're doing. We love bringing it to you every day, and we love the fact that we have the Irish Breakdown family in the chat. So thanks a lot, you guys. We really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. So for Brian, I am Vince, and we will talk to you tomorrow at 1:00.